Welcome to Audiobook Empire. You are about to listen to The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill, Volume 2 of 8, covering self-confidence and the habit of saving. This is the legendary 24-lesson course Napoleon Hill spent 20 years building and the direct foundation behind Think and Grow Rich. Narrated by Michael Stone, sit back and let's begin. Lesson 3: Self-confidence. Amidst all the mysteries by which we are surrounded, nothing is more certain than that we are in the presence of an infinite and eternal energy from which all things proceed. Herbert Spencer. Lesson 3: Self-confidence. You can do it if you believe you can. Before approaching the fundamental principles upon which this lesson is founded, it will be of benefit to you to keep in mind the fact that it is practical, that it brings you the discoveries of more than 25 years of research, that it has the approval of the leading scientific men and women of the world who have tested every principle involved. Skepticism is the deadly enemy of progress and self-development. You might as well lay this book aside and stop right here as to approach this lesson with the feeling that it was written by some long-haired theorist who had never tested the principles upon which the lesson is based. Surely this is no age for the skeptic, because it is an age in which we have seen more of nature's laws uncovered and harnessed than had been discovered in all past history of the human race. Within 3 decades we have witnessed the mastery of the air, we have explored the ocean, we have all but annihilated distances on the earth, we have harnessed the lightning and made it turn the wheels of industry. We have made 7 blades of grass grow where but one grew before. We have instantaneous communication between the nations of the world. Truly, this is an age of illumination and unfoldment, but we have as yet barely scratched the surface of knowledge. However, when we shall have unlocked the gate that leads to the secret power which is stored up within us, it will bring us knowledge that will make all past discoveries pale into oblivion by comparison. Thought is the most highly organized form of energy known to man, and this is an age of experimentation and research that is sure to bring us into greater understanding of that mysterious force called thought, which reposes within us. We have already found out enough about the human mind to know that a man may throw off the accumulated effects of 1,000 generations of fear through the aid of the principle of autosuggestion. We have already discovered the fact that fear is the chief reason for poverty and failure and misery that takes on 1,000 different forms. We have already discovered the fact that the man who masters fear may march on to successful achievement in practically any undertaking, despite all efforts to defeat him. The development of self-confidence starts with the elimination of this demon called fear, which sits upon a man's shoulder and whispers into his ear, "You can't do it, you are afraid to try, you are afraid of public opinion, you are afraid that you will fail, you are afraid you have not the ability." This fear demon is getting into close quarters. Science has found a deadly weapon with which to put it to flight, and this lesson on self-confidence has brought you this weapon for use in your battle with the world-old enemy of progress, fear. The 6 basic fears of mankind. Every person falls heir to the influence of 6 basic fears. Under these 6 fears may be listed the lesser fears. The 6 basic or major fears are here enumerated, and the sources from which they are believed to have grown are described. The 6 basic fears are: the fear of poverty, B, the fear of old age, C, the fear of criticism, D, the fear of loss of love of someone, E, the fear of ill health / the fear of death. Study the list, then take inventory of your own fears and ascertain under which of the 6 headings you can classify them. Every human being who has reached the age of understanding is bound down, to some extent, by one or more of these 6 basic fears. As the first step in the elimination of these 6 evils, let us examine the sources from whence we inherited them. Physical and social heredity. All that man is, both physically and mentally, he came by through 2 forms of heredity. One is known as physical heredity, and the other is called social heredity. Through the law of physical heredity, man has slowly evolved from the amoeba, a single-cell animal form, through stages of development corresponding to all the known animal forms now on this earth, including those which are known to have existed but which are now extinct. Every generation through which man has passed has added to his nature something of the traits, habits, and physical appearance of that generation. Man's physical inheritance, therefore, is a heterogeneous collection of many habits and physical forms. There seems little, if any, doubt that while the 6 basic fears of man could not have been inherited through physical heredity, these 6 basic fears being mental states of mind, and therefore not capable of transmission through physical heredity, it is obvious that through physical heredity, a most favorable lodging place for these 6 fears has been provided. For example, it is a well-known fact that the whole process of physical evolution is based upon death, destruction, pain, and cruelty. that the elements of the soil of the earth find transportation in their upward climb through evolution, based upon the death of one form of life in order that another and higher form may subsist. All vegetation lives by eating the elements of the soil and the elements of the air. All forms of animal life live by eating some other and weaker form or some form of vegetation. The cells of all vegetation have a very high order of intelligence. The cells of all animal life likewise have a very high order of intelligence. Undoubtedly, the animal cells of a fish have learned, out of bitter experience, that the group of animal cells known as a fish hawk are to be greatly feared. By reason of the fact that many animal forms, including that of most men, live by eating the smaller and weaker animals, the cell intelligence of these animals which enter into and become a part of man brings with it the fear growing out of their experience in having been eaten alive. This theory may seem to be far-fetched, and in fact it may not be true, but it is at least a logical theory if it is nothing more. The author makes no particular point of this theory, nor does he insist that it accounts for any of the 6 basic fears. There is another and a much better explanation of the source of these fears, which we will proceed to examine, beginning with a description of social heredity. By far the most important part of man's makeup comes to him through the law of social heredity, this term having reference to the methods by which one generation imposes upon the minds of the generation under its immediate control the superstitions, beliefs, legends, and ideas which it, in turn, inherited from the generation preceding. The term social heredity should be understood to mean any and all sources through which a person acquires knowledge, such as schooling of religious and all other natures, reading, word-of-mouth conversation, storytelling, and all manner of thought inspiration coming from what is generally accepted as one's personal experiences. Through the operation of the law of social heredity, anyone having control of the mind of a child may, through intense teaching, plant in that child's mind any idea, whether false or true, in such a manner that the child accepts it as true, and it becomes as much a part of the child's personality as any cell or organ of its physical body, and just as hard to change in its nature. It is through the law of social heredity that the religionist plants in the child mind dogmas and creeds and religious ceremonies too numerous to describe, holding those ideas before that mind until the mind accepts them and forever seals them as a part of its irrevocable belief. The mind of a child which has not come into the age of general understanding, during an average period covering, let us say, the first 2 years of its life, is plastic, open, clean, and free. Any idea planted in such a mind by one in whom the child has confidence takes root and grows, so to speak, in such a manner that it never can be eradicated or wiped out, no matter how opposed to logic or reason that idea may be. Many religionists claim that they can so deeply implant the tenets of their religion in the mind of a child that there never can be room in that mind for any other religion, either in whole or in part. The claims are not greatly overdrawn. With this explanation of the manner in which the law of social heredity operates, the student will be ready to examine the sources from which man inherits the 6 basic fears. Moreover, any student, except those who have not yet grown big enough to examine truth that steps upon the pet corns of their own superstitions, may check the soundness of the principle of social heredity as it is here applied to the 6 basic fears, without going outside of his or her own personal experiences. Fortunately, practically the entire mass of evidence submitted in this lesson is of such a nature that all who sincerely seek the truth may ascertain, for themselves, whether the evidence is sound or not. For the moment at least, lay aside your prejudices and preconceived ideas. You may always go back and pick them up again, while we study the origin and nature of man's 6 worst enemies, the 6 basic fears, beginning with the fear of poverty. It requires courage to tell the truth about the origin of this fear, and still greater courage, perhaps, to accept the truth after it has been told. The fear of poverty grew out of man's inherited tendency to prey upon his fellow man economically. Nearly all forms of lower animals have instinct, but appear not to have the power to reason and think. Therefore, they prey upon one another physically. Man, with his superior sense of intuition, thought, and reason, does not eat his fellow men bodily. He gets more satisfaction out of eating them financially. Of all the ages of the world of which we know anything, the age in which we live seems to be the age of money worship. A man is considered less than the dust of the earth unless he can display a fat bank account. Nothing brings man so much suffering and humiliation as does poverty. No wonder man fears poverty. Through a long line of inherited experiences with the man-animal, man has learned, for certain, that this animal cannot always be trusted where matters of money and other evidences of earthly possessions are concerned. Many marriages have their beginning, and oftentimes their ending, solely on the basis of the wealth possessed by one or both of the contracting parties. It is no wonder that the divorce courts are busy. Society could quite properly be spelled society, because it is inseparably associated with the dollar mark. So eager is man to possess wealth that he will acquire it in whatever manner he can. Through legal methods if possible, through other methods if necessary. The fear of poverty is a terrible thing. A man may commit murder, engage in robbery, rape, and all other manner of violation of the rights of others, and still regain a high station in the minds of his fellow men, providing always that he does not lose his wealth. Poverty, therefore, is a crime, an unforgivable sin, as it were. No wonder man fears it. Every statute book in the world bears evidence that the fear of poverty is one of the 6 basic fears of mankind, for in every such book of laws may be found various and sundry laws intended to protect the weak from the strong. To spend time trying to prove either that the fear of poverty is one of man's inherited fears, or that this fear has its origin in man's nature to cheat his fellow man, would be similar to trying to prove that 3 times 2 are 6. Obviously no man would ever fear poverty if he had any grounds for trusting his fellow men, for there is food and shelter and raiment and luxury of every nature sufficient for the needs of every person on earth, and all these blessings would be enjoyed by every person except for the swinish habit that man has of trying to push all the other swine out of the trough, even after he has all and more than he needs. The second of the 6 basic fears with which man is bound is the fear of old age. In the main, this fear grows out of 2 sources. First, the thought that old age may bring with it poverty. Secondly, and by far the most common source of origin, from false and cruel sectarian teachings which have been so well mixed with fire and brimstone, and with purgatories and other bogies that human beings have learned to fear old age because it meant the approach of another, and possibly a much more horrible, world than this one which is known to be bad enough. In the basic fear of old age, man has 2 very sound reasons for his apprehension. The one growing out of distrust of his fellow men who may seize whatever worldly goods he may possess, and the other arising from the terrible pictures of the world to come which were deeply planted in his mind, through the law of social heredity, long before he came into possession of that mind. Is it any wonder that man fears the approach of old age? The third of the 6 basic fears is the fear of criticism. Just how man acquired this basic fear it would be hard, if not impossible, definitely to determine, but one thing is certain, he has it in well-developed form. Some believe that this fear made its appearance in the mind of man about the time that politics came into existence. Others believe its source can be traced no further than the first meeting of an organization of females known as a woman's club. Still another school of humorists charges the origin to the contents of the Holy Bible, whose pages abound with some very vitriolic and violent forms of criticism. If the latter claim is correct, and those who believe literally all they find in the Bible are not mistaken, then God is responsible for man's inherent fear of criticism, because God caused the Bible to be written. This author, being neither a humorist nor a prophet, but just an ordinary workaday type of person, is inclined to attribute the basic fear of criticism to that part of man's inherited nature which prompts him not only to take away his fellow man's goods and wares, but to justify his action by criticism of his fellow man's character. The fear of criticism takes on many different forms, the majority of which are petty and trivial in nature, even to the extent of being childish in the extreme. Bald-headed men, for example, are bald for no other reason than their fear of criticism. Heads become bald because of the protection of hats with tight-fitting bands, which cut off the circulation at the roots of the hair. Men wear hats not because they actually need them for the sake of comfort, but mainly because everybody's doing it, and the individual falls in line and does it also, lest some other individual criticize him. Women seldom have bald heads or even thin hair because they wear hats that are loose, the only purpose of which is to make an appearance. But it must not be imagined that women are free from the fear of criticism associated with hats. If any woman claims to be superior to man with reference to this fear, ask her to walk down the street wearing a hat that is 1 or 2 seasons out of style. In every soul there has been deposited the seed of a great future, but that seed will never germinate, much less grow to maturity, except through the rendering of useful service. The makers of all manner of clothing have not been slow to capitalize this basic fear of criticism with which all mankind is cursed. Every season, it will be observed, the styles in many articles of wearing apparel change. Who establishes the styles? Certainly not the purchaser of clothes, but the manufacturer of clothes. Why does he change the styles so often? Obviously, this change is made so that the manufacturer can sell more clothes. For the same reason, the manufacturers of automobiles, with a few rare and very sensible exceptions, change styles every season. The manufacturer of clothing knows how the man-animal fears to wear a garment which is one season out of step with that which they are all wearing now. Is this not true? Does not your own experience back it up? We have been describing the manner in which people behave under the influence of the fear of criticism as applied to the small and petty things of life. Let us now examine human behavior under this fear when it affects people in connection with the more important matters connected with human intercourse. Take, for example, practically any person who has reached the age of mental maturity, from 35 to 45 years of age as a general average, and if you could read his or her mind, you would find in that mind a very decided disbelief of and rebellion against most of the fables taught by the majority of the religionists. Powerful and mighty is the fear of criticism. The time was, and not so very long ago at that, when the word infidel meant ruin to whomsoever it was applied. It is seen, therefore, that man's fear of criticism is not without ample cause for its existence. The fourth basic fear is that of the fear of loss of love of someone. The source from which this fear originated needs but little description, for it is obvious that it grew out of man's nature to steal his fellow man's mate, or at least to take liberties with her, unknown to her rightful lord and master. By nature all men are polygamous, the statement of a truth which will, of course, bring denials from those who are either too old to function in a normal way sexually, or have, from some other cause, lost the contents of certain glands which are responsible for man's tendency toward the plurality of the opposite sex. There can be but little doubt that jealousy and all other similar forms of more or less mild dementia praecox, insanity, grew out of man's inherited fear of the loss of love of someone. Of all the sane fools studied by this author, that represented by a man who has become jealous of some woman, or that of a woman who has become jealous of some man, is the oddest and strangest. The author, fortunately, never had but one case of personal experience with this form of insanity, but from that experience he learned enough to justify him in stating that the fear of the loss of love of someone is one of the most painful, if not in fact the most painful, of all the 6 basic fears. And it seems reasonable to add that this fear plays more havoc with the human mind than do any of the other 6 basic fears, often leading to the more violent forms of permanent insanity. The 5th basic fear is that of the fear of ill health. This fear has its origin, to considerable extent also, in the same sources from which the fears of poverty and old age are derived. The fear of ill health must needs be closely associated with both poverty and old age, because it also leads toward the border line of terrible worlds of which man knows not, but of which he has heard some discomforting stories. The author strongly suspects that those engaged in the business of selling good health methods have had considerable to do with keeping the fear of ill health alive in the human mind. For longer than the record of the human race can be relied upon, the world has known of various and sundry forms of therapy and health purveyors. If a man gains his living from keeping people in good health, it seems but natural that he would use every means at his command for persuading people that they needed his services. Thus, in time, it might be that people would inherit a fear of ill health. The 6th and last of the 6 basic fears is that of the fear of death. To many this is the worst of all the 6 basic fears, and the reason why it is so regarded becomes obvious to even the casual student of psychology. The terrible pangs of fear associated with death may be charged directly to religious fanaticism, the source which is more responsible for it than are all other sources combined. So-called heathen are not as much afraid of death as are the civilized, especially that portion of the civilized population which has come under the influence of theology. For hundreds of millions of years man has been asking the still unanswered, and it may be the unanswerable questions, whence and whither, where did I come from and where am I going after death? The more cunning and crafty, as well as the honest but credulous of the race have not been slow to offer the answer to these questions. In fact, the answering of these questions has become one of the so-called learned professions, despite the fact that but little learning is required to enter this profession. Witness now the major source of origin of the fear of death. Come into my tent, embrace my faith, accept my dogmas, and pay my salary, and I will give you a ticket that will admit you straightway into heaven when you die, says the leader of one form of sectarianism. Remain out of my tent, says this same leader, and you will go direct to hell, where you will burn throughout eternity. While, in fact, the self-appointed leader may not be able to provide safe conduct into heaven nor, By lack of such provision, allow the unfortunate seeker after truth to descend into hell. The possibility of the latter seems so terrible that it lays hold of the mind and creates that fear of fears, the fear of death. In truth, no man knows, and no man has ever known, what heaven or hell is like, or if such places exist, and this very lack of definite knowledge opens the door of the human mind to the charlatan to enter and control that mind with his stock of legerdemain and various brands of trickery, deceit, and fraud. The truth is this, nothing less and nothing more, that no man knows nor has any man ever known where we come from at birth or where we go at death. Any person claiming otherwise is either deceiving himself, or he is a conscious impostor who makes it a business to live without rendering service of value, through play upon the credulity of humanity. Be it said in their behalf, however, the majority of those engaged in selling tickets into heaven actually believe not only that they know where heaven exists, but that their creeds and formulas will give safe passage to all who embrace them. This belief may be summed up in one word: credulity. Religious leaders generally make the broad, sweeping claim that the present civilization owes its existence to the work done by the churches. This author, as far as he is personally concerned, is willing to grant their claims to be correct, if at the same time he be permitted to add that even if this claim be true, the theologians haven't a great deal of which to brag. But it is not, cannot be, true that civilization has grown out of the efforts of the organized churches and creeds, if by the term civilization is meant the uncovering of the natural laws and the many inventions to which the world is the present heir. If the theologians wish to claim that part of civilization which has to do with man's conduct toward his fellow man, they are perfectly welcome to it, as far as this author is concerned. But on the other hand, if they presume to gobble up the credit for all the scientific discovery of mankind, the author begs leave to offer vigorous protest. It is hardly sufficient to state that social heredity is the method through which man gathers all knowledge that reaches him through the five senses. It is more to the point to state how social heredity works, in as many different applications as will give the student a comprehensive understanding of that law. Let us begin with some of the lower forms of animal life and examine the manner in which they are affected by the law of social heredity. Shortly after this author began to examine the major sources from which men gather the knowledge which makes them what they are, some 30-odd years ago, he discovered the nest of a ruffed grouse. The nest was so located that the mother bird could be seen from a considerable distance when she was on the nest. With the aid of a pair of field glasses, the bird was closely watched until the young birds were hatched out. It happened that the regular daily observation was made but a few hours after the young birds came out of the shell. Desiring to know what would happen, the author approached the nest. The mother bird remained nearby until the intruder was within 10 or 12 feet of her. Then she disarranged her feathers, stretched one wing over her leg, and went hobbling away, making a pretense of being crippled. Being somewhat familiar with the tricks of mother birds, the author did not follow, but instead went to the nest to take a look at the little ones. Without the slightest signs of fear, they turned their eyes toward him, moving their heads first one way and then another. He reached down and picked one of them up. With no signs of fear, it stood in the palm of his hand. He laid the bird back in the nest and went away to a safe distance to give the mother bird a chance to return. The wait was short. Very soon she began cautiously to edge her way back toward the nest until she was within a few feet of it, when she spread her wings and ran as fast as she could, uttering, meanwhile, a series of sounds similar to those of a hen when she has found some morsel of food and wishes to call her brood to partake of it. She gathered the little birds around and continued to quiver in a highly excited manner, shaking her wings and ruffling her feathers. One could almost hear her words as she gave the little birds their first lesson in self-defense, through the law of social heredity. "You silly little creatures, do you not know that men are your enemies? Shame on you for allowing that man to pick you up in his hands. It's a wonder he didn't carry you off and eat you alive. The next time you see a man approaching, make yourselves scarce. Lie down on the ground, run under leaves, go anywhere to get out of sight, and remain out of sight until the enemy is well on his way." The little birds stood around and listened to the lecture with intense interest. After the mother bird had quieted down, the author again started to approach the nest. When within 20 feet or so of the guarded household, the mother bird again started to lead him in the other direction by crumpling up her wing and hobbling along as if she were crippled. He looked at the nest, but the glance was in vain. The little birds were nowhere to be found. They had learned rapidly to avoid their natural enemy, thanks to their natural instinct. Again the author retreated, awaited until the mother bird had reassembled her household, then came out to visit them, but with similar results. When he approached the spot where he last saw the mother bird, not the slightest signs of the little fellows were to be found. When a small boy, the author captured a young crow and made a pet of it. The bird became quite well satisfied with its domestic surroundings and learned to perform many tricks requiring considerable intelligence. After the bird was big enough to fly, it was permitted to go wherever it pleased. Sometimes it would be gone for many hours, but it always returned home before dark. One day some wild crows became involved in a fight with an owl in a field near the house where the pet crow lived. As soon as the pet heard the caw, caw, caw of its wild relatives, it flew up on top of the house, and with signs of great agitation, walked from one end of the house to the other. Finally it took wing and flew in the direction of the battle. The author followed to see what would happen. In a few minutes he came up with the pet. It was sitting on the lower branches of a tree, and two wild crows were sitting on a limb just above, chattering and walking back and forth, acting very much in the same fashion that angry parents behave toward their offspring when chastising them. As the author approached, the two wild crows flew away, one of them circling around the tree a few times, meanwhile letting out a terrible flow of most abusive language, which no doubt was directed at its foolish relative who hadn't enough sense to fly while the flying was good. The pet was called, but it paid no attention. That evening it returned home, but would not come near the house. It sat on a high limb of an apple tree and talked in crow language for about 10 minutes, saying, no doubt, that it had decided to go back to the wild life of its fellows, then flew away and did not return until 2 days later, when it came back and did some more talking in crow language, keeping at a safe distance meanwhile. It then went away and never returned. Social heredity had robbed the author of a fine pet. The only consolation he got from the loss of his crow was the thought that it had shown fine sportsmanship by coming back and giving notice of its intention to depart. Many farm hands had left the farm without going to the trouble of this formality. It is a well-known fact that a fox will prey upon all manner of foul and small animals, with the exception of the skunk. No reason need be stated as to why Mr. Skunk enjoys immunity. A fox may tackle a skunk once, but never twice. For this reason, a skunk hide, when nailed to a chicken roost, will keep all but the very young and inexperienced foxes at a safe distance. The odor of a skunk, once experienced, is never to be forgotten. No other smell even remotely resembles it. It is nowhere recorded that any mother fox ever taught her young how to detect and keep away from the familiar smell of a skunk, but all who are informed on fox lore know that foxes and skunks never seek lodgment in the same cave. But one lesson is sufficient to teach the fox all it cares to know about skunks. Through the law of social heredity, operating via the sense of smell, one lesson serves for an entire lifetime. A bullfrog can be caught on a fish hook by attaching a small piece of red cloth or any other small red object to the hook and dangling it in front of the frog's nose. That is, Mr. Frog may be caught in this manner, provided he is hooked the first time he snaps at the bait, but if he is poorly hooked and makes a getaway, or if he feels the point of the hook when he bites at the bait but is not caught, he will never make the same mistake again. The author spent many hours in stealthy attempt to hook a particularly desirable specimen which had snapped and missed, before learning that but one lesson in social heredity is enough to teach even a humble croaker that bits of red flannel are things to be let alone. The author once owned a very fine male Airedale dog, which caused no end of annoyance by his habit of coming home with a young chicken in his mouth. Is it not strange that we fear most that which never happens, that we destroy our initiative by the fear of defeat, when in reality, defeat is a most useful tonic and should be accepted as such? Each time the chicken was taken away from the dog and he was soundly switched, but to no avail, he continued in his liking for fowl. For the purpose of saving the dog, if possible, and as an experiment with social heredity, this dog was taken to the farm of a neighbor who had a hen and some newly hatched chickens. The hen was placed in the barn, and the dog was turned in with her. As soon as everyone was out of sight, the dog slowly edged up toward the hen, sniffed the air in her direction a time or two, to make sure she was the kind of meat for which he was looking, then made a dive toward her. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hen had been doing some surveying on her own account, for she met Mr. Dog more than halfway. Moreover, she met him with such a surprise of wings and claws as he had never before experienced. The first round was clearly the hen's, but a nice fat bird reckoned the dog was not to slip between his paws so easily, therefore he backed away a short distance, then charged again. This time Mrs. Hen lit upon his back, drove her claws into his skin, and made effective use of her sharp bill. Mr. Dog retreated to his comer, looking for all the world as if he were listening for someone to ring the bell and call the fight off until he got his bearings. but Mrs. Hen craved no time for deliberation. She had her adversary on the run and showed that she knew the value of the offensive by keeping him on the run. One could almost understand her words as she flogged the poor Airedale from one corner to another, keeping up a series of rapid-fire sounds which for all the world resembled the remonstrations of an angry mother who had been called upon to defend her offspring from an attack by older boys. The Airedale was a poor soldier. After running around the barn from corner to corner for about 2 minutes, he spread himself on the ground as flat as he could and did his best to protect his eyes with his paws. Mrs. Hen seemed to be making a special attempt to peck out his eyes. The owner of the hen then stepped in and retrieved her, or, more accurately stating it, he retrieved the dog, which in no way appeared to meet with the dog's disapproval. The next day a chicken was placed in the cellar where the dog slept. As soon as he saw the bird, he tucked his tail between his legs and ran for a corner. He never again attempted to catch a chicken. One lesson in social heredity via the sense of touch was sufficient to teach him that while chicken chasing may offer some enjoyment, it is also fraught with much hazard. All these illustrations, with the exception of the first, describe the process of gathering knowledge through direct experience. Observe the marked difference between knowledge gathered by direct experience and that which is gathered through the training of the young by the old, as in the case of the ruffed grouse and her young. The most impressive lessons are those learned by the young from the old, through highly colored or emotionalized methods of teaching. When the mother grouse spread her wings, stood her feathers on end, shook herself like a man suffering with the palsy, and chattered to her young in a highly excited manner, she planted the fear of man in their hearts in a manner which they were never to forget. The term social heredity, as used in connection with this lesson, has particular reference to all methods through which a child is taught any idea, dogma, creed, religion, or system of ethical conduct, by its parents or those who may have authority over it, before reaching the age at which it may reason and reflect upon such teaching in its own way. Estimating the age of such reasoning power at, let us say, 7 to 12 years. There are myriads of forms of fear, but none are more deadly than the fear of poverty and old age. We drive our bodies as if they were slaves because we are so afraid of poverty that we wish to hoard money for what old age. This common form of fear drives us so hard that we overwork our bodies and bring on the very thing we are struggling to avoid. What a tragedy to watch a man drive himself when he begins to arrive along about the 40-year mile-post of life, the age at which he is just beginning to mature mentally. At 40, a man is just entering the age in which he is able to see and understand and assimilate the handwriting of nature, as it appears in the forests and flowing brooks and faces of men and little children. Yet this devil fear drives him so hard that he becomes blinded and lost in the entanglement of a maze of conflicting desires. The principle of organized effort is lost sight of, and instead of laying hold of nature's forces which are in evidence all around him, and permitting those forces to carry him to the heights of great achievement, he defies them and they become forces of destruction. Perhaps none of these great forces of nature are more available for man's unfoldment than is the principle of autosuggestion, but ignorance of this force is leading the majority of the human race to apply it so that it acts as a hindrance and not as a help. Let us here enumerate the facts which show just how this misapplication of a great force of nature takes place. Here is a man who meets with some disappointment, a friend proves false, or a neighbor seems indifferent. Forthwith he decides, through self-suggestion, all men are untrustworthy, and all neighbors unappreciative. These thoughts so deeply imb themselves in his subconscious mind that they color his whole attitude toward others. Go back now to what was said in Lesson 2, about the dominating thoughts of a man's mind attracting people whose thoughts are similar. Apply the law of attraction, and you will soon see and understand why the unbeliever attracts other unbelievers. Reverse the principle. Here is a man who sees nothing but the best there is in all whom he meets. If his neighbors seem indifferent, he takes no notice of that fact, for he makes it his business to fill his mind with dominating thoughts of optimism and good cheer and faith in others. If people speak to him harshly, he speaks back in tones of softness. Through the operation of this same eternal law of attraction, he draws to himself the attention of people whose attitude toward life and whose dominating thoughts harmonize with his own. Tracing the principle a step further, here is a man who has been well schooled and has the ability to render the world some needed service. Somewhere, sometime, he has heard it said that modesty is a great virtue and that to push himself to the front of the stage in the game of life savors of egotism. He quietly slips in at the back door and takes a seat at the rear, while other players in the game of life boldly step to the front. He remains in the back row because he fears what they will say. Public opinion, or that which he believes to be public opinion, has him pushed to the rear, and the world hears but little of him. His schooling counts for naught because he is afraid to let the world know that he has had it. He is constantly suggesting to himself, thus using the great force of autosuggestion to his own detriment, that he should remain in the background lest he be criticized, as if criticism would do him any damage or defeat his purpose. Here is another man who was born of poor parents. Since the first day that he can remember, he has seen evidence of poverty. He has heard talk of poverty. He has felt the icy hand of poverty on his shoulders, and it has so impressed him that he fixes it in his mind as a curse to which he must submit. Quite unconsciously, he permits himself to fall victim of the belief, once poor always poor, until that belief becomes the dominating thought of his mind. He resembles a horse that has been harnessed and broken, until it forgets that it has the potential power with which to throw off that harness. Autosuggestion is rapidly relegating him to the back of the stage of life. Your work and mine are peculiarly akin. I am helping the laws of nature create more perfect specimens of vegetation, while you are using those same laws, through the law of success philosophy, to create more perfect specimens of thinkers. Luther Burbank, finally he becomes a quitter. Ambition is gone. Opportunity comes his way no longer, or if it does, he has not the vision to see it. He has accepted his fate. It is a well-established fact that the faculties of the mind, like the limbs of the body, atrophy and wither away if not used. Self-confidence is no exception. It develops when used but disappears if not used. One of the chief disadvantages of inherited wealth is the fact that it too often leads to inaction and loss of self-confidence. Some years ago, a baby boy was born to Mrs. E.B. McLean in the city of Washington. His inheritance was said to be around $100 million. When this baby was taken for an airing in its carriage, it was surrounded by nurses and assistant nurses and detectives and other servants whose duty was to see that no harm befell it. As the years passed by, this same vigilance was kept up. This child did not have to dress himself. He had servants who did that. Servants watched over him while he slept and while he was at play. He was not permitted to do anything that a servant could do for him. He had grown to the age of 10 years. One day he was playing in the yard and noticed that the back gate had been left open. In all of his life he had never been outside of that gate alone, and naturally that was just the thing that he wished to do. During a moment when the servants were not looking, he dashed out at the gate and was run down and killed by an automobile before he reached the middle of the street. He had used his servants' eyes until his own no longer served him, as they might have done had he learned to rely upon them. 20 years ago, the man whom I served as secretary sent his 2 sons away to school. One of them went to the University of Virginia and the other to a college in New York. Each month it was a part of my task to make out a check for $100 for each of these boys. This was their pin money, to be spent as they wished. How profitably I remember the way I envied those boys as I made out those checks each month. I often wondered why the hand of fate bore me into the world in poverty. I could look ahead and see how these boys would rise to the high stations in life while I remained a humble clerk. In due time the boys returned home with their sheepskins. Their father was a wealthy man who owned banks and railroads and coal mines and other property of great value. Good positions were waiting for the boys in their father's employ. But 20 years of time can play cruel tricks on those who have never had to struggle. Perhaps a better way to state this truth would be that time gives those who have never had to struggle a chance to play cruel tricks on themselves. At any rate, these 2 boys brought home from school other things besides their sheepskins. They came back with well-developed capacities for strong drink capacities, which they developed because the $100 which each of them received each month made it unnecessary for them to struggle. Theirs is a long and sad story, the details of which will not interest you, but you will be interested in their finis. As this lesson is being written, I have on my desk a copy of the newspaper published in the town where these boys lived. Their father has been bankrupted and his costly mansion, where the boys were born, has been placed on the block for sale. One of the boys died of delirium tremens, and the other one is in an insane asylum. Not all rich men's sons turn out so, unfortunately, but the fact remains, nevertheless, that inaction leads to atrophy, and this, in turn, leads to loss of ambition and self-confidence. And without these essential qualities, a man will be carried through life on the wings of uncertainty, just as a dry leaf may be carried here and there on the bosom of the stray winds. Far from being a disadvantage, struggle is a decided advantage, because it develops those qualities which would forever lie dormant without it. Many a man has found his place in the world because of having been forced to struggle for existence early in life. Lack of knowledge of the advantages accruing from struggle has prompted many a parent to say, I had to work hard when I was young, but I shall see to it that my children have an easy time, poor foolish creatures. An easy time usually turns out to be a greater handicap than the average young man or woman can survive. There are worse things in this world than being forced to work in early life. Forced idleness is far worse than forced labor. Being forced to work and forced to do your best will breed in you temperance and self-control and strength of will and content, and 100 other virtues which the idle will never know. Not only does lack of the necessity for struggle lead to weakness of ambition and willpower, but what is more dangerous still, it sets up in a person's mind a state of lethargy that leads to the loss of self-confidence. The person who has quit struggling because effort is no longer necessary is literally applying the principle of autosuggestion in undermining his own power of self-confidence. Such a person will finally drift into a frame of mind in which he will actually look with more or less contempt upon the person who is forced to carry on. The human mind, if you will pardon repetition, may be likened to an electric battery. It may be positive or it may be negative. Self-confidence is the quality with which the mind is recharged and made positive. Let us apply this line of reasoning to salesmanship and see what part self-confidence plays in this great field of endeavor. One of the greatest salesmen this country has ever seen was once a clerk in a newspaper office. It will be worth your while to analyze the method through which he gained his title as the world's leading salesman. He was a timid young man with a more or less retiring sort of nature. He was one of those who believe it best to slip in by the back door and take a seat at the rear of the stage of life. One evening he heard a lecture on the subject of this lesson, self-confidence, and that lecture so impressed him that he left the lecture hall with a firm determination to pull himself out of the rut into which he had drifted. He went to the business manager of the paper and asked for a position as solicitor of advertising and was put to work on a commission basis. Everyone in the office expected to see him fail, as this sort of salesmanship calls for the most positive type of sales ability. He went to his room and made out a list of a certain type of merchants on whom he intended to call. One would think that he would naturally have made up his list of the names of those whom he believed he could sell with the least effort, but he did nothing of the sort. He placed on his list only the names of the merchants on whom other advertising solicitors had called without making a sale. His list consisted of only 12 names. Before he made a single call, he went out to the city park, took out his list of 12 names, read it over 100 times, saying to himself as he did so, "You will purchase advertising space from me before the end of the month." Then he began to make his calls. The first day he closed sales with 3 of the 12 impossibilities. During the remainder of the week he made sales to 2 others. By the end of the month he had opened advertising accounts with all but one of the merchants that he had on the list. For the ensuing month he made no sales, for the reason that he made no calls except on this one obstinate merchant. Every morning when the store opened, he was on hand to interview this merchant, and every morning the merchant said no. The merchant knew he was not going to buy advertising space, but this young man didn't know it. When the merchant said no, the young man did not hear it, but kept right on coming. On the last day of the month, after having told this persistent young man no for 30 consecutive times, the merchant said, "Look here, young man, you have wasted a whole month trying to sell me. Now what I would like to know is this: why have you wasted your time?" "Wasted my time nothing," he retorted. "I have no man can become a great leader of men unless he has the milk of human kindness in his own heart, and leads by suggestion and kindness rather than by force. Been going to school and you have been my teacher. Now I know all the arguments that a merchant can bring up for not buying, and besides that I have been drilling myself in self-confidence." Then the merchant said, "I will make a little confession of my own. I too have been going to school and you have been my teacher. You have taught me a lesson in persistence that is worth money to me, and to show you my appreciation, I am going to pay my tuition fee by giving you an order for advertising space." And that was the way in which the Philadelphia North American's best advertising account was brought in. Likewise, it marked the beginning of a reputation that has made that same young man a millionaire. He succeeded because he deliberately charged his own mind with sufficient self-confidence to make that mind an irresistible force. When he sat down to make up that list of 12 names, he did something that 99 people out of 100 would not have done. He selected the names of those whom he believed it would be hard to sell, because he understood that out of the resistance he would meet with in trying to sell them would come strength and self-confidence. He was one of the very few people who understand that all rivers and some men are crooked because of following the line of least resistance. I am going to digress and here break the line of thought for a moment while recording a word of advice to the wives of men. Remember, these lines are intended only for wives, and husbands are not expected to read that which is here set down. From having analyzed more than 16,000 people, the majority of whom were married men, I have learned something that may be of value to wives. Let me state my thought in these words. You have it within your power to send your husband away to his work or his business or his profession each day with a feeling of self-confidence that will carry him successfully over the rough spots of the day and bring him home again, at night, smiling and happy. One of my acquaintances of former years married a woman who had a set of false teeth. One day his wife dropped her teeth and broke the plate. The husband picked up the pieces and began examining them. He showed such interest in them that his wife said, "You could make a set of teeth like those if you made up your mind to do it." This man was a farmer whose ambitions had never carried him beyond the bounds of his little farm until his wife made that remark. She walked over and laid her hand on his shoulder and encouraged him to try his hand at dentistry. She finally coaxed him to make the start, and today he is one of the most prominent and successful dentists in the state of Virginia. I know him well, for he is my father. No one can foretell the possibilities of achievement available to the man whose wife stands at his back and urges him on to bigger and better endeavor, for it is a well-known fact that a woman can arouse a man so that he will perform almost superhuman feats. It is your right and your duty to encourage your husband and urge him on in worthy undertakings until he shall have found his place in the world. You can induce him to put forth greater effort than can any other person in the world. Make him believe that nothing within reason is beyond his power of achievement, and you will have rendered him a service that will go a long way toward helping him win in the battle of life. One of the most successful men in his line in America gives entire credit for his success to his wife. When they were first married, she wrote a creed which he signed and placed over his desk. This is a copy of the creed. I believe in myself, I believe in those who work with me, I believe in my employer, I believe in my friends, I believe in my family. I believe that God will lend me everything I need with which to succeed if I do my best to earn it through faithful and honest service. I believe in prayer, and I will never close my eyes in sleep without praying for divine guidance to the end that I will be patient with other people and tolerant with those who do not believe as I do. I believe that success is the result of intelligent effort and does not depend upon luck or sharp practices or double-crossing friends, fellow men, or my employer. I believe I will get out of life exactly what I put into it, therefore I will be careful to conduct myself toward others as I would want them to act toward me. I will not slander those whom I do not like. I will not slight my work no matter what one may see others doing. I will render the best service of which I am capable because I have pledged myself to succeed in life, and I know that success is always the result of conscientious and efficient effort. Finally, I will forgive those who offend me because I realize that I shall sometimes offend others, and I will need their forgiveness. Signed, the woman who wrote this creed was a practical psychologist of the first order. With the influence and guidance of such a woman as a helpmate, any man could achieve noteworthy success. Analyze this creed, and you will notice how freely the personal pronoun is used. It starts off with the affirmation of self-confidence, which is perfectly proper. No man could make this creed his own without developing the positive attitude that would attract to him people who would aid him in his struggle for success. This would be a splendid creed for every salesman to adopt. It might not hurt your chances for success if you adopted it. Mere adoption, however, is not enough. You must practice it, read it over and over until you know it by heart. Then repeat it at least once a day until you have literally transformed it into your mental makeup. Keep a copy of it before you as a daily reminder of your pledge to practice it. By doing so, you will be making efficient use of the principle of autosuggestion as a means of developing self-confidence. Never mind what anyone may say about your procedure. Just remember that it is your business to succeed, and this creed, if mastered and applied, will go a long way toward helping you. You learned in Lesson 2 that any idea you firmly fix in your subconscious mind, by repeated affirmation, automatically becomes a plan or blueprint which an unseen power uses in directing your efforts toward the attainment of the objective named in the plan. You have also learned that the principle through which you may fix any idea you choose in your mind is called autosuggestion, which simply means a suggestion that you give to your own mind. It was this principle of autosuggestion that Emerson had in mind when he wrote, "Nothing can bring you peace but yourself." You might well remember that nothing can bring you success but yourself. Of course, you will need the cooperation of others if you aim to attain success of a far-reaching nature, but you will never get that cooperation unless you vitalize your mind with the positive attitude of self-confidence. Perhaps you have wondered why a few men advance to highly paid positions while others all around them, who have as much training and who seemingly perform as much work, do not get ahead. Select any two people of these two types that you choose and study them, and the reason why one advances and the other stands still will be quite obvious to you. You will find that the one who advances believes in himself. You will find that he backs this belief with such dynamic, aggressive action that he lets others know that he believes in himself. You will also notice that this self-confidence is contagious, it is impelling, it is persuasive, it attracts others. If you want a thing done well, call on some busy person to do it. Busy people are generally the most painstaking and thorough in all they do. You will also find that the one who does not advance shows clearly, by the look on his face, by the posture of his body, by the lack of briskness in his step, by the uncertainty with which he speaks, that he lacks self-confidence. No one is going to pay much attention to the person who has no confidence in himself. He does not attract others because his mind is a negative force that repels rather than attracts. In no other field of endeavor does self-confidence or the lack of it play such an important part as in the field of salesmanship, and you do not need to be a character analyst to determine, the moment you meet him, whether a salesman possesses this quality of self-confidence. If he has it, the signs of its influence are written all over him. He inspires you with confidence in him, and in the goods he is selling the moment he speaks. We come now to the point at which you are ready to take hold of the principle of autosuggestion and make direct use of it in developing yourself into a positive and dynamic and self-reliant person. You are instructed to copy the following formula, sign it and commit it to memory. Self-confidence formula first. I know that I have the ability to achieve the object of my definite purpose. Therefore, I demand of myself persistent, aggressive, and continuous action toward its attainment. Second, I realize that the dominating thoughts of my mind eventually reproduce themselves in outward bodily action and gradually transform themselves into physical reality. Therefore, I will concentrate my mind for 30 minutes daily upon the task of thinking of the person I intend to be, by creating a mental picture of this person, and then transforming that picture into reality through practical service. Third, I know that through the principle of autosuggestion, any desire that I persistently hold in my mind will eventually seek expression through some practical means of realizing it. Therefore, I shall devote 10 minutes daily to demanding of myself the development of the factors named in the 16 lessons of this reading course on the law of success. Fourth, I have clearly mapped out and written down a description of my definite purpose in life for the coming 5 years. I have set a price on my services for each of these 5 years, a price that I intend to earn and receive through strict application of the principle of efficient, satisfactory service which I will render in advance. Fifth, I fully realize that no wealth or position can long endure unless built upon truth and justice. Therefore, I will engage in no transaction which does not benefit all whom it affects. One will succeed by attracting to me the forces I wish to use and the cooperation of other people. I will induce others to serve me because I will first serve them. I will eliminate hatred, envy, jealousy, selfishness, and cynicism by developing love for all humanity, because I know that a negative attitude toward others can never bring me success. I will cause others to believe in me because I will believe in them and in myself. I will sign my name to this formula, commit it to memory, and repeat it aloud once a day with full faith that it will gradually influence my entire life so that I will become a successful and happy worker in my chosen field of endeavor. Signed, before you sign your name to this formula, make sure that you intend to carry out its instructions. Back of this formula lies a law that no man can explain. The psychologists refer to this law as autosuggestion and let it go at that, but you should bear in mind one point about which there is no uncertainty, and that is the fact that whatever this law is, it actually works. Another point to be kept in mind is the fact that, just as electricity will turn the wheels of industry and serve mankind in a million other ways, or snuff out life if wrongly applied, so will this principle of autosuggestion lead you up the mountainside of peace and prosperity, or down into the valley of misery and poverty, according to the application you make of it. If you fill your mind with doubt and unbelief in your ability to achieve, then the principle of autosuggestion takes this spirit of unbelief and sets it up in your subconscious mind as your dominating thought and slowly, but surely draws you into the whirlpool of failure. But if you fill your mind with radiant self-confidence, the principle of autosuggestion takes this belief and sets it up as your dominating thought and helps you master the obstacles that fall in your way until you reach the mountaintop of success. The power of habit. Having myself experienced all the difficulties that stand in the road of those who lack the understanding to make practical application of this great principle of autosuggestion, let me take you a short way into the principle of habit, through the aid of which you may easily apply the principle of autosuggestion in any direction and for any purpose whatsoever. Habit grows out of environment, out of doing the same thing or thinking the same thoughts or repeating the same words over and over again. Habit may be likened to the groove on a phonograph record, while the human mind may be likened to the needle that fits into that groove. When any habit has been well formed through repetition of thought or action, the mind has a tendency to attach itself to and follow the course of that habit as closely as the phonograph needle follows the groove in the wax record. Habit is created by repeatedly directing one or more of the five senses of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling in a given direction. It is through this repetition principle that the injurious drug habit is formed. It is through this same principle that the desire for intoxicating drink is formed into a habit. After habit has been well established, it will automatically control and direct our bodily activity, wherein may be found a thought that can be transformed into a powerful factor in the development of self-confidence. The thought is this: voluntarily and by force if necessary, direct your efforts and your thoughts along a desired line until you have formed the habit that will lay hold of you and continue, voluntarily, to direct your efforts along the same line. The object in writing out and repeating the self-confidence formula is to form the habit of making belief in yourself the dominating thought of your mind, until that thought has been thoroughly embedded in your subconscious mind through the principle of habit. You learn to write by repeatedly directing the muscles of your arm and hand over certain outlines known as letters, until finally you form the habit of tracing these outlines. Now you write with ease and rapidity without tracing each letter slowly. Writing has become a habit with you. The principle of habit will lay hold of the faculties of your mind just the same as it will influence the physical muscles of your body, as you can easily prove by mastering and applying this lesson on self-confidence. Any statement that you repeatedly make to yourself, or any desire that you deeply plant in your mind through repeated statement, will eventually seek expression through your physical, outward bodily efforts. The principle of habit is the very foundation upon which this lesson on self-confidence is built, and if you will understand and follow the directions laid down in this lesson, you will soon know more about the law of habit from first-hand knowledge than could be taught you by 1,000 such lessons as this. You have but little conception of the possibilities which lie sleeping within you, awaiting but the awakening hand of vision to arouse you, and you will never have a better conception of those possibilities unless you develop sufficient self-confidence to lift a home, is something that cannot be bought. You can buy a house, but only a woman can make of it a home, you above the commonplace influences of your present environment. The human mind is a marvelous, mysterious piece of machinery, a fact of which I was reminded a few months ago when I picked up Emerson's essays and reread his essay on spiritual laws. A strange thing happened. I saw in that essay, which I had read scores of times previously, much that I had never noticed before. I saw more in this essay than I had seen during previous readings, because the unfoldment of my mind since the last reading had prepared me to interpret more. The human mind is constantly unfolding, like the petals of a flower, until it reaches the maximum of development. What this maximum is, where it ends, or whether it ends at all or not, are unanswerable questions, but the degree of unfoldment seems to vary according to the nature of the individual and the degree to which he keeps his mind at work. A mind that is forced or coaxed into analytical thought every day seems to keep on unfolding and developing greater powers of interpretation. Down in Louisville, Kentucky, lives Mr. Lee Cook, a man who has practically no legs and has to wheel himself around on a cart. In spite of the fact that Mr. Cook has been without legs since birth, he is the owner of a great industry and a millionaire through his own efforts. He has proved that a man can get along very well without legs if he has a well-developed self-confidence. In the city of New York, one may see a strong, able-bodied and able-headed young man, without legs, rolling himself down Fifth Avenue every afternoon, with cap in hand, begging for a living. His head is perhaps as sound and as able to think as the average. This young man could duplicate anything that Mr. Cook of Louisville has done if he thought of himself as Mr. Cook thinks of himself. Henry Ford owns more millions of dollars than he will ever need or use. Not so many years ago, he was working as a laborer in a machine shop with but little schooling and without capital. Scores of other men, some of them with better organized brains than his, worked near him. Ford threw off the poverty consciousness, developed confidence in himself, thought of success, and attained it. Those who worked around him could have done as well had they thought as he did. Milo C. Jones of Wisconsin was stricken down with paralysis a few years ago. So bad was the stroke that he could not turn himself in bed or move a muscle of his body. His physical body was useless, but there was nothing wrong with his brain, so it began to function in earnest, probably for the first time in its existence. Lying flat on his back in bed, Mr. Jones made that brain create a definite purpose. That purpose was prosaic and humble enough in nature, but it was definite and it was a purpose, something that he had never known before. His definite purpose was to make pork sausage. Calling his family around him, he told of his plans and began directing them in carrying the plans into action. With nothing to aid him except a sound mind and plenty of self-confidence, Milo C. Jones spread the name and reputation of Little Pig Sausage all over the United States and accumulated a fortune besides. All this was accomplished after paralysis had made it impossible for him to work with his hands. Where thought prevails, power may be found. Henry Ford has made millions of dollars and is still making millions of dollars each year because he believed in Henry Ford and transformed that belief into a definite purpose and backed that purpose with a definite plan. The other machinists who worked along with Ford during the early days of his career visioned nothing but a weekly pay envelope, and that was all they ever got. They demanded nothing out of the ordinary of themselves. If you want to get more, be sure to demand more of yourself. Notice that this demand is to be made on yourself. There comes to mind a well-known poem whose author expressed a great psychological truth. If you think you are beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you like to win, but you think you can't, it is almost certain you won't. If you think you'll lose, you've lost, for out of the world we find success begins with a fellow's will. It's all in the state of mind. If you think you are outclassed, you've got to think high to rise. You've got to be sure of yourself before you can ever win a prize. Life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster man, but soon or late the man who wins is the man who thinks he can. It can do no harm if you commit this poem to memory and use it as a part of your working equipment in the development of self-confidence. Somewhere in your makeup there is a subtle something which, if it were aroused by the proper outside influence, would carry you to heights of achievement such as you have never before anticipated. Just as a master player can take hold of a violin and cause that instrument to pour forth the most beautiful and entrancing strains of music, so is there some outside influence that can lay hold of your mind and cause you to go forth into the field of your chosen endeavor and play a glorious symphony of success. No man knows what hidden forces lie dormant within you. You yourself do not know your capacity for achievement, and you never will know until you come in contact with that particular stimulus which arouses you to greater action and extends your vision, develops your self-confidence, and moves you with a deeper desire to achieve. It is not unreasonable to expect that some statement, some idea, or some stimulating word of this reading course on the law of success will serve as the needed stimulus that will reshape your destiny and redirect your thoughts and energies along a pathway that will lead you, finally, to your coveted goal of life. It is strange but true that the most important turning points of life often come at the most unexpected times and in the most unexpected ways. I have in mind a typical example of how some of the seemingly unimportant experiences of life often turn out to be the most important of all, and I am relating this ease because it shows, also, what a man can accomplish when he awakens to a full understanding of the value of self-confidence. The incident to which I refer happened in the city of Chicago while I was engaged in the work of character analysis. One day a tramp presented himself at my office and asked for an interview. As I looked up from my work and greeted him, he said, "I have come to see the man who wrote this little book," as he removed from his pocket a copy of a book entitled Self-Confidence, which I had written many years previously. "It must have been the hand of fate," he continued, "that slipped this book into my pocket yesterday afternoon, because I was about ready to go out there and punch a hole in Lake Michigan. I had about come to the conclusion that everything and everybody, including God, had it in for me until I read this book, and it gave me a new viewpoint and brought me the courage and the hope that sustained me through the night. I made up my mind that if I could see the man who wrote this book, he could help me get on my feet again. Now, I am here and I would like to know what you can do for a man like me." While he was speaking, I had been studying him from head to foot, and I am frank to admit that down deep in my heart, I did not believe there was anything I could do for him, but I did not wish to tell him so. The glassy stare in his eyes, the lines of discouragement in his face, the posture of his body. The only man who makes no mistakes is the man who never does anything. Do not be afraid of mistakes providing you do not make the same one twice. Roosevelt. The 10 days' growth of beard on his face, the nervous manner about this man all conveyed to me the impression that he was hopeless, but I did not have the heart to tell him so, therefore I asked him to sit down and tell me his whole story. I asked him to be perfectly frank and tell me, as nearly as possible, just what had brought him down to the ragged edge of life. I promised him that after I had heard his entire story, I would then tell him whether or not I could be of service to him. He related his story in lengthy detail, the sum and substance of which was this. He had invested his entire fortune in a small manufacturing business. When the World War began in 191, it was impossible for him to get the raw materials necessary in the operation of his factory, and he therefore failed. The loss of his money broke his heart and so disturbed his mind that he left his wife and children and became a tramp. He had actually brooded over his loss until he had reached the point at which he was contemplating suicide. After he had finished his story, I said to him, "I have listened to you with a great deal of interest, and I wish that there was something which I could do to help you, but there is absolutely nothing." He became as pale as he will be when he is laid away in a coffin, and settled back in his chair and dropped his chin on his chest as much as to say, "That settles it." I waited for a few seconds, then said, "While there is nothing that I can do for you, there is a man in this building to whom I will introduce you if you wish, who can help you regain your lost fortune and put you back on your feet again." These words had barely fallen from my lips when he jumped up, grabbed me by the hands, and said, "For God's sake, lead me to this man." It was encouraging to note that he had asked this for God's sake. This indicated that there was still a spark of hope within his breast, so I took him by the arm and led him out into the laboratory where my psychological tests in character analysis were conducted, and stood with him in front of what looked to be a curtain over a door. I pulled the curtain aside and uncovered a tall looking-glass in which he saw himself from head to foot. Pointing my finger at the glass, I said, "There stands the man to whom I promised to introduce you. There's the only man in this world who can put you back on your feet again, and unless you sit down and become acquainted with that man, as you never became acquainted with him before, you might just as well go on over and punch a hole in Lake Michigan, because you will be of no value to yourself or to the world until you know this man better." He stepped over to the glass, rubbed his hands over his bearded face, studied himself from head to foot for a few moments, then stepped back, dropped his head, and began to weep. I knew that the lesson had been driven home, so I led him back to the elevator and sent him away. I never expected to see him again, and I doubted that the lesson would be sufficient to help him regain his place in the world, because he seemed to be too far gone for redemption. He seemed to be not only down, but almost out. A few days later I met this man on the street. His transformation had been so complete that I hardly recognized him. He was walking briskly, with his head tilted back. That old, shifting, nervous posture of his body was gone. He was dressed in new clothes from head to foot. He looked prosperous, and he felt prosperous. He stopped me and related what had happened to bring about his rapid transformation from a state of abject failure to one of hope and promise. "I was just on my way to your office," he explained, "to bring you the good news. I went out the very day that I was in your office, a down-and-out tramp, and despite my appearance I sold myself at a salary of $3,000 a year. Think of it, man, $3,000 a year. And my employer advanced me money enough with which to buy some new clothes, as you can see for yourself. He also advanced me some money to send home to my family, and I am once more on the road to success. It seems like a dream when I think that only a few days ago I had lost hope and faith and courage, and was actually contemplating suicide. I was coming to tell you that one of these days, when you are least expecting me, I will pay you another visit, and when I do, I will be a successful man. I will bring with me a check signed in blank and made payable to you, and you may fill in the amount because you have saved me from myself by introducing me to myself, that self which I never knew until you stood me in front of that looking-glass and pointed out the real me." As that man turned and departed in the crowded streets of Chicago, I saw, for the first time in my life, what strength and power and possibility lie hidden in the mind of the man who has never discovered the value of self-reliance. Then and there I made up my mind that I, too, would stand in front of that same looking-glass and point an accusing finger at myself for not having discovered the lesson which I had helped another to learn. I did stand before that same looking-glass, and as I did so I then and there fixed in my mind, as my definite purpose in life, the determination to help men and women discover the forces that lie sleeping within them. The book you hold in your hands is evidence that my definite purpose is being carried out. The man whose story I have related is now the president of one of the largest and most successful concerns of its kind in America, with a business that extends from coast to coast and from Canada to Mexico. A short while after the incident just related, a woman came to my office for personal analysis. She was then a teacher in the Chicago public schools. I gave her an analysis chart and asked her to fill it out. She had been at work on the chart but a few minutes when she came back to my desk, handed back the chart and said, "I do not believe I will fill this out." I asked her why she had decided not to fill out the chart and she replied, "To be perfectly frank with you." One of the questions in this chart put me to thinking, and I now know what is wrong with me. Therefore, I feel it unnecessary to pay you a fee to analyze me. With that, the woman went away, and I did not hear from her for 2 years. She went to New York City, became a writer of advertising copy for one of the largest agencies in the country, and her income at the time she wrote me was $10,000 a year. This woman sent me a check to cover the cost of my analysis fee, because she felt that the fee had been earned, even though I did not render her the service that I usually render my clients. It is impossible for anyone to foretell what seemingly insignificant incident may lead to an important turning point in one's career, but there is no denying the fact that these turning points may be more readily recognized by those who have well-rounded out confidence in themselves. One of the irreparable losses to the human race lies in the lack of knowledge that there is a definite method through which self-confidence can be developed in any person of average intelligence. What an immeasurable loss to civilization that young men and women are not taught this known method of developing self-confidence before they complete their schooling, for no one who lacks faith in himself is really educated in the proper sense of the term. Oh, what glory and satisfaction would be the happy heritage of the man or woman who could pull aside the curtain of fear that hangs over the human race and shuts out the sunlight of understanding that self-confidence brings, wherever it is in evidence. Where fear controls, noteworthy achievement becomes an impossibility, a fact which brings to mind the definition of fear, as stated by a great philosopher. Fear is the dungeon of the mind into which it runs and hides and seeks seclusion. Fear brings on superstition, and superstition is the dagger with which hypocrisy assassinates the soul. In front of the typewriter on which I am writing, love, beauty, joy, and worship are forever building, tearing down and rebuilding the foundation of each man's soul. The manuscripts for this reading course hangs a sign with the following wording, in big letters: "Day by day, in every way, I am becoming more successful." The skeptic who read that sign asked if I really believed that stuff, and I replied, "Of course not." All it ever did for me was to help me get out of the coal mines where I started as a laborer, and find a place in the world in which I am serving upwards of 100,000 people, in whose minds I am planting the same positive thought that this sign brings out. Therefore, why should I believe in it? As this man started to leave, he said, "Well, perhaps there is something to this sort of philosophy, after all. For I have always been afraid that I would be a failure, and so far my fears have been thoroughly realized. You are condemning yourself to poverty, misery, and failure, or you are driving yourself on toward the heights of great achievement solely by the thoughts you think. If you demand success of yourself, and back up this demand with intelligent action, you are sure to win. Bear in mind, though, that there is a difference between demanding success and just merely wishing for it. You should find out what this difference is and take advantage of it. Do you remember what the Bible says? Look it up, somewhere in the book of Matthew, about those who have faith as a grain of mustard seed. Go at the task of developing self-confidence with at least that much faith, if not more. Never mind what they will say, because you might as well know that they will be of little aid to you in your climb up the mountainside of life toward the object of your definite purpose. You have within you all the power you need with which to get whatever you want or need in this world, and about the best way to avail yourself of this power is to believe in yourself. Know thyself, man, know thyself. This has been the advice of the philosophers all down the ages. When you really know yourself, you will know that there is nothing foolish about hanging a sign in front of you that reads like this: "Day by day, in every way, I am becoming more successful," with due apologies to the Frenchman who made this motto popular. I am not afraid to place this sort of suggestion in front of my desk, and what is more to the point, I am not afraid to believe that it will influence me so that I will become a more positive and aggressive human being. More than 25 years ago, I learned my first lesson in self-confidence building. One night I was sitting before an open fireplace, listening to a conversation between some older men on the subject of capital and labor. Without invitation, I joined in the conversation and said something about employers and employees settling their differences on the golden rule basis. My remarks attracted the attention of one of the men, who turned to me with a look of surprise on his face and said, Why, you are a bright boy, and if you would go out and get a schooling, you would make your mark in the world. Those remarks fell on fertile ears, even though that was the first time anyone had ever told me that I was bright or that I might accomplish anything worthwhile in life. The remark put me to thinking, and the more I allowed my mind to dwell upon that thought, the more certain I became that the remark had back of it a possibility. It might be truthfully stated that whatever service I am rendering the world and whatever good I accomplish should be credited to that offhand remark. Suggestions such as this are often powerful, and none the less so when they are deliberate and self-expressed. Go back now to the self-confidence formula and master it, for it will lead you into the powerhouse of your own mind, where you will tap a force that can be made to carry you to the very top of the ladder of success. Others will believe in you only when you believe in yourself. They will tune in on your thoughts and feel toward you just as you feel toward yourself. The law of mental telepathy takes care of this. You are continuously broadcasting how you think of yourself, and if you have no faith in yourself, others will pick up the vibrations of your thoughts and mistake them for their own. Once understand the law of mental telepathy, and you will know why self-confidence is the second of the 15 laws of success. You should be cautioned, however, to learn the difference between self-confidence, which is based upon sound knowledge of what you know and what you can do, and egotism, which is only based upon what you wish you knew or could do. Learn the difference between these two terms, or you will make yourself boresome, ridiculous, and annoying to people of culture and understanding. Self-confidence is something which should never be proclaimed or announced except through intelligent performance of constructive deeds. If you have self-confidence, those around you will discover this fact. Let them make the discovery. They will feel proud of their alertness in having made the discovery, and you will be free from the suspicion of egotism. Opportunity never stalks the person with a highly developed state of egotism, but brickbats and ugly remarks do. Opportunity forms affinities much more easily and quickly with self-confidence than it does with egotism. Self-praise is never a proper measure of self-reliance. Bear this in mind and let your self-confidence speak only through the tongue of constructive service rendered without fuss or flurry. Self-confidence is the product of knowledge. Know yourself, know how much you know and how little, why you know it and how you are going to use it. Four flushers come to grief, therefore, do not pretend to know more than you actually do know. There's no use of pretense, because any educated person will measure you quite accurately after hearing you speak for 3 minutes. What you really are will speak so loudly that what you claim you are will not be heard. If you heed this warning, the last 4 pages of this one lesson may mark one of the most important turning points of your life. Believe in yourself, but do not tell the world what you can do. Show it. You are now ready for lesson 4, which will take you the next step up the ladder of success. Discontentment. And after the lesson visit with the author, the marker stands at the entrance gate of life and writes, "Poor fool," on the brow of the wise man, and "Poor sinner," on the brow of the saint. The supreme mystery of the universe is life. We come here without our consent, from whence we know not. We go away without our consent, whither we know not. We are eternally trying to solve this great riddle of life, and for what purpose and to what end. That we are placed on this earth for a definite reason there can be no doubt by any thinker. May it not be possible that the power which placed us here will know what to do with us when we pass on beyond the great divide? Would it not be a good plan to give the Creator who placed us here on earth credit for having enough intelligence to know what to do with us after we pass on? Or should we assume the intelligence and the ability to control the future life in our own way? May it not be possible that we can cooperate with the Creator very intelligently by assuming to control our conduct on this earth to the end that we may be decent to one another and do all the good we can in all the ways we can during this life, leaving the hereafter to one who probably knows, better than we, what is best for us? The artist has told a powerful story in the picture at the top of this page. From birth until death, the mind is always reaching out for that which it does not possess. The little child, playing with its toys on the floor, sees another child with a different sort of toy and immediately tries to lay hands on that toy. The female child, grown tall, believes the other woman's clothes more becoming than her own and sets out to duplicate them. The male child, grown tall, sees another man with a bigger collection of railroads or banks or merchandise and says to himself, how fortunate, how can I separate him from his belongings? F.W. Woolworth, the 5 and 10 cent store king, stood on Fifth Avenue in New York City and gazed upward at the tall Metropolitan building and said, how wonderful. I will build one much taller. The crowning achievement of his life was measured by the Woolworth building. That building stands as a temporary symbol of man's nature to excel the handiwork of other men. a monument to the vanity of man, with but little else to justify its existence. The little ragged newsboy on the street stands, with wide-open mouth, and envies the businessman as he alights from his automobile at the curb and starts into his office. "How happy I would be," the newsboy says to himself, "if I owned a Lizzie." And the businessman seated at his desk inside thinks how happy he would be if he could add another $1 million to his already overswollen bankroll. "The grass is always sweeter on the other side of the fence," says the jackass as he stretches his neck in the attempt to get to it. Turn a crowd of boys into an apple orchard, and they will pass by the nice mellow apples on the ground. The red, juicy ones hanging dangerously high in the top of the tree look much more tempting, and up the tree they will go. The married man takes a sheepish glance at the daintily dressed ladies on the street and thinks how fortunate he would be if his wife were as pretty as they. Perhaps she is much prettier, but he misses that beauty because the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Most divorce cases grow out of man's tendency to climb the fence into the other fellow's pastures. Happiness is always just around the bend, always in sight but just out of reach. Life is never complete, no matter what we have or how much of it we possess. One thing calls for something else to go with it. Milady buys a pretty hat. She must have a gown to match it. That calls for new shoes and hose and gloves and other accessories that run into a big bill far beyond her husband's means. Man longs for a home, just a plain little house setting off in the edge of the woods. He builds it, but it is not complete. He must have shrubbery and flowers and landscaping to go with it. Still, it is not complete. He must have a beautiful fence around it with a graveled driveway. That calls for a motor car and a garage in which to house it. All these little touches have been added, but to no avail. The place is now too small. He must have a house with more rooms. The Ford coupe must be replaced by a Cadillac sedan, so there will be room for company in the cross-country tour. On and on the story goes, ad infinitum. The young man receives a salary sufficient to keep him and his family fairly comfortable. Then comes a promotion and an advance in salary of $1,000 a year. Does he lay the extra $1,000 away in the savings account and continue living as before? He does nothing of the sort. Immediately he must trade the old car in for a new one. A porch must be added to the house. The wife needs a new wardrobe. The table must be set with better food and more of it. Pity his poor, groaning stomach. At the end of the year, is he better off with the increase? He is nothing of the sort. The more he gets, the more he wants, and the rule applies to the man with millions the same as to the man with but a few thousands. The young man selects the girl of his choice, believing he cannot live without her. After he gets her, he is not sure that he can live with her. If a man remains a bachelor, he wonders why he is so stupid as to deprive himself of the joys of married life. If he marries, he wonders how she happened to catch him off guard long enough to harpoon him. And the god of destiny cries out, "O fool, zero fool, you are damned if you do and you are damned if you don't." At every crossroad of life, the imps of discontentment stand in the shadows of the background, with a grin of mockery on their faces, crying out, "Take the road of your own choice. We will get you in the end." At last man becomes disillusioned and begins to learn that happiness and contentment are not of this world. Then begins the search for the password that will open the door to him in some world of which he knows not. Surely there must be happiness on the other side of the great divide. In desperation his tired, careworn heart turns to religion for hope and encouragement, but his troubles are not over, they are just starting. "Come into our tent and accept our creed," says one sect, "and you may go straight to heaven after death." Poor man hesitates, looks and listens. Then he hears the call of another brand of religion whose leader says, "Stay out of the other camp or you'll go straight to hell. They only sprinkle water on your head, but we push you all the way under, thereby ensuring you safe passage into the land of promise." In the midst of sectarian claims and counterclaims, poor man becomes undecided. Not knowing whether to turn this way or that, he wonders which brand of religion offers the safest passageway until hope vanishes. Myself, when young, did eagerly frequent doctor and saint and heard great argument about it and about, but evermore came out by the same door wherein I went. Always seeking but never finding, thus might be described man's struggle for happiness and contentment. He tries one religion after another, finally joining the big church which the world has named the damned. His mind becomes an eternal question mark, searching hither and yon for an answer to the questions, whence and whither. The worldly hope men set their hearts upon turns ashes, or it prospers. And anon, like snow upon the desert's dusty face, lighting a little hour or two, is gone. Life is an everlasting question mark. That which we want most is always in the embryonic distance of the future. Our power to acquire is always a decade or so behind our power to desire, and if we catch up with the thing we want, we no longer want it. Fortunate is the young woman who learns this great truth and keeps her lover always guessing, always on the defensive lest he may lose her. Our favorite author is a hero and a genius until we meet him in person and learn the sad truth that after all, he is only a man. How often must we learn this lesson? Men cease to interest us when we find their limitations. The only sin is limitation. As soon as you once come up with a man's limitations, it is all over with him. Emerson. How beautiful the mountain yonder in the distance, but the moment we draw near it, we find it to be nothing but a wretched collection of rocks and dirt and trees. Out of this truth grew the oft-repeated adage, familiarity breeds contempt. Beauty and happiness and contentment are states of mind. They can never be enjoyed except through vision of the afar. The most beautiful painting of Rembrandt becomes a mere smudge of daubed paint if we come too near it. Destroy the hope of unfinished dreams in man's heart, and he is finished. The moment a man ceases to cherish the vision of future achievement, he is through. Nature has built man so that his greatest and only lasting happiness is that which he feels in the pursuit of some yet unattained object. Anticipation is sweeter than realization. That which is at hand does not satisfy. The only enduring satisfaction is that which comes to the person who keeps alive in his heart the hope of future achievement, when that hope dies right finis across the human heart. Life's greatest inconsistency is the fact that most of that which we believe is not true. Russell Conwell wrote the most popular lecture ever delivered in the English language. He called it Acres of Diamonds. The central idea of the lecture was the statement that one need not seek opportunity in the distance, that opportunity may be found in the vicinity of one's birth, perhaps, but how many believe it? Opportunity may be found wherever one really looks for it, and nowhere else. To most men, the picking looks better on the other side of the fence. How futile to urge one to try out one's luck in the little hometown when it is man's nature to look for opportunity in some other locality. Do not worry because the grass looks sweeter on the other side of the fence. Nature intended it so. Thus does she allure us and groom us for the lifelong task of growth through struggle. The highest compact we can make with our fellow is, let there be truth between us two forevermore. Emerson in 16 Lessons teaching, for the first time in the history of the world, the true philosophy upon which all personal success is built. BY Lesson 4. The habit of saving. The only lasting favor which the parent may confer upon the child is that of helping the child to help itself. Lesson 4. The habit of saving. Man is a combination of flesh, bone, blood, hair, and brain cells. These are the building materials out of which he shapes, through the law of habit, his own personality. To advise one to save money without describing how to save would be somewhat like drawing the picture of a horse and writing under it, "This is a horse." It is obvious to all that the saving of money is one of the essentials for success, but the big question uppermost in the minds of the majority of those who do not save is, how can I do it? The saving of money is solely a matter of habit. For this reason, this lesson begins with a brief analysis of the law of habit. It is literally true that man, through the law of habit, shapes his own personality. Through repetition, any act indulged in a few times becomes a habit, and the mind appears to be nothing more than a mass of motivating forces growing out of our daily habits. When once fixed in the mind, a habit voluntarily impels one to action. For example, follow a given route to your daily work, or to some other place that you frequently visit, and very soon the habit has been formed, and your mind will lead you over that route without thought on your part. Moreover, if you start out with the intention of traveling in another direction, without keeping the thought of the change in routes constantly in mind, you will find yourself following the old route. Public speakers have found that the telling over and over again of a story, which may be based upon pure fiction, brings into play the law of habit, and very soon they forget whether the story is true or not. WALLS of limitation. Built through habit, millions of people go through life in poverty and want because they have made destructive use of the law of habit. Not understanding either the law of habit or the law of attraction through which like attracts like, those who remain in poverty seldom realize that they are where they are as the result of their own acts. Fix in your mind the thought that your ability is limited to a given earning capacity, and you will never earn more than that, because the law of habit will set up a definite limitation of the amount you can earn. Your subconscious mind will accept this limitation, and very soon you will feel yourself slipping, until finally you will become so hedged in by fear of poverty, one of the 6 basic fears, that opportunity will no longer knock at your door. Your doom will be sealed, your fate fixed. Formation of the habit of saving does not mean that you shall limit your earning capacity. It means just the opposite, that you shall apply this law so that it not only conserves that which you earn in a systematic manner, but it also places you in the way of greater opportunity and gives you the vision, the self-confidence, the imagination, the enthusiasm, the initiative and leadership actually to increase your earning capacity. Stating this great law in another way, when you thoroughly understand the law of habit, you may ensure yourself success in the great game of money-making by playing both ends of that game against the middle. You proceed in this manner. First, through the law of definite chief aim, you set up in your mind an accurate, definite description of that which you want, including the amount of money you intend to earn. Your subconscious mind takes over this picture which you have created and uses it as a blueprint, chart, or map by which to mold your thoughts and actions into practical plans for attaining the object of your chief aim or purpose. Through the law of habit, you keep the object of your definite chief aim fixed in your mind, in the manner described in Lesson 2, until it becomes firmly and permanently implanted there. This practice will destroy the poverty consciousness and set up in its place a prosperity consciousness. You will actually begin to demand prosperity, you will begin to expect it, you will begin to prepare yourself to receive it and to use it wisely, thus paving the way or setting the stage for the development of the habit of saving. Second, having in this manner increased your earning power, you will make further use of the law of habit by provision, in your written statement of your definite chief aim, for saving a definite proportion of all the money you earn. Therefore, as your earnings increase, your savings will, likewise, increase in proportion. By ever urging yourself on and demanding of yourself increased earning power on the one hand, and by systematically laying aside a definite amount of all your earnings, on the other hand, you will soon reach the point at which you have removed all imaginary limitations from your own mind, and you will then be well started on the road toward financial independence. Nothing could be more practical or more easily accomplished than this. Reverse the operation of the law of habit by setting up in your mind the fear of poverty, and very soon this fear will reduce your earning capacity until you will be barely able to earn sufficient money to take care of your actual necessities. The publishers of newspapers could create a panic in a week's time by filling their columns with news items concerning the actual business failures of the country, despite the fact that but few businesses compared to the total number in existence actually fail. The so-called crime waves are very largely the products of sensational journalism. A single murder case, when exploited by the newspapers of the country through scare headlines, is sufficient to start a regular wave of similar crimes in various localities. Following the repetition in the daily papers of the Hickman murder story, similar cases began to be reported from other parts of the country. We are the victims of our habits, no matter who we are or what may be our life calling. Any idea that is deliberately fixed in the mind, or any idea that is permitted to set itself up in the mind, as the result of suggestion, environment, the influence of associates, and so on, is sure to cause us to indulge in acts which conform to the nature of the idea. Form the habit of thinking and talking of prosperity and abundance, and very soon material evidence of these will begin to manifest itself in the nature of wider opportunity and new and unexpected opportunity, like attracts like. If you are in business and have formed the habit of talking and thinking about business being bad, business will be bad. One pessimist, providing he is permitted to continue his destructive influence long enough, can destroy the work of half a dozen competent men, and he will do it by setting adrift in the minds of his associates the thought of poverty and failure. Don't be this type of man or woman. One of the most successful bankers in the state of Illinois has this sign hanging in his private office. You are a human magnet, and you are constantly attracting to you people whose characters harmonize with your own. We talk and think only of abundance here. If you have a tale of woe, please keep it, as we do not want it. No business firm wants the services of a pessimist, and those who understand the law of attraction and the law of habit will no more tolerate the pessimist than they would permit a burglar to roam around their place of business, for the reason that one such person will destroy the usefulness of those around him. In tens of thousands of homes, the general topic of conversation is poverty and want, and that is just what they are getting. They think of poverty, they talk of poverty, they accept poverty as their lot in life. They reason that because their ancestors were poor before them, they also must remain poor. The poverty consciousness is formed as the result of the habit of thinking of and fearing poverty. Lo, the thing I had feared has come upon me. The slavery of debt is a merciless master, a fatal enemy of the savings habit. Poverty alone is sufficient to kill off ambition, destroy self-confidence, and destroy hope, but add to it the burden of debt, and all who are victims of these two cruel taskmasters are practically doomed to failure. No man can do his best work, no man can express himself in terms that command respect, no man can either create or carry out a definite purpose in life, with heavy debt hanging over his head. The man who is bound in the slavery of debt is just as helpless as the slave who is bound by ignorance or by actual chains. The author has a very close friend whose income is $1,000 a month. His wife loves society and tries to make a $20,000 showing on a $12,000 income, with the result that this poor fellow is usually about $8,000 in debt. Every member of his family has the spending habit, having acquired this from the mother. The children, 2 girls and 1 boy, are now of the age when they are thinking of going to college, but this is impossible because of the father's debts. The result is dissension between the father and his children, which makes the entire family unhappy and miserable. It is a terrible thing even to think of going through life like a prisoner in chains, bound down and owned by somebody else on account of debts. The accumulation of debts is a habit. It starts in a small way and grows to enormous proportions slowly, step by step, until finally it takes charge of one's very soul. Thousands of young men start their married lives with unnecessary debts hanging over their heads and never manage to get out from under the load. After the novelty of marriage begins to wear off, as it usually does, the married couple begin to feel the embarrassment of want, and this feeling grows until it leads, oftentimes, to open dissatisfaction with one another and eventually to the divorce court. A man who is bound by the slavery of debt has no time or inclination to set up or work out ideals, with the result that he drifts downward with time until he eventually begins to set up limitations in his own mind, and by these he hedges himself behind prison walls of fear and doubt from which he never escapes. No sacrifice is too great to avoid the misery of debt. Think of what you owe yourself and those who are dependent upon you and resolve to be no man's debtor, is the advice of one very successful man whose early chances were destroyed by debt. This man came to himself soon enough to throw off the habit of buying that which he did not need, and eventually worked his way out of slavery. Most men who develop the habit of debt will not be so fortunate as to come to their senses in time to save themselves, because debt is something like quicksand in that it has a tendency to draw its victim deeper and deeper into the mire. The fear of poverty is one of the most destructive of the 6 basic fears described in Lesson 3. The man who becomes hopelessly in debt is seized with this poverty fear, his ambition and self-confidence become paralyzed, and he sinks gradually into oblivion. There are 2 classes of debts, and these are so different in nature that they deserve to be here described as follows. There are debts incurred for luxuries which become a dead loss. There are debts incurred in the course of professional or business trading, which represent service or merchandise that can be converted back into assets. The first class of debts is the one to be avoided. The second class may be indulged in, providing the one incurring the debts uses judgment and does not go beyond the bounds of reasonable limitation. The moment one buys beyond his limitations, he enters the realm of speculation, and speculation swallows more of its victims than it enriches. Practically all people who live beyond their means are tempted to speculate with the hope that they may recoup, at a single turn of the wheel of fortune, so to speak, their entire indebtedness. The wheel generally stops at the wrong place, and far from finding themselves out of debt, such people as indulge in speculation are bound more closely as slaves of debt. The fear of poverty breaks down the willpower of its victims, and they then find themselves unable to restore their lost fortunes, and what is still more sad, they lose all ambition to extricate themselves from the slavery of debt. Hardly a day passes that one may not see an account in the newspapers of at least one suicide as the result of worry over debts. The slavery of debt causes more suicides every year than all other causes combined, which is a slight indication of the cruelty of the poverty fear. During the war, millions of men faced the frontline trenches without flinching, knowing that death might overtake them any moment. Those same men, when facing the fear of poverty, often cringe and out of sheer desperation, which paralyzes their reason, sometimes commit suicide. The person who is free from debt may whip poverty and achieve outstanding financial success, but if he is bound by debt, such achievement is but a remote possibility and never a probability. Fear of poverty is a negative, destructive state of mind. Moreover, one negative state of mind has a tendency to attract other similar states of mind. For example, the fear of poverty may attract the fear of ill health, and these two may attract the fear of old age, so that the victim finds himself poverty-stricken, in ill health, and actually growing old long before the time when he should begin to show the signs of old age. Millions of untimely, nameless graves have been filled by this cruel state of mind known as the fear of poverty. Less than a dozen years ago, a young man held a responsible position with the City National Bank of New York City. Through living beyond his income, he contracted a large amount of debts which caused him to worry until this destructive habit began to show up in his work and he was dismissed from the bank's service. He secured another position at less money, but his creditors embarrassed him so that he decided to resign and go away into another city, where he hoped to escape them until he had accumulated enough money to pay off his indebtedness. Creditors have a way of tracing debtors, so very soon they were close on the heels of this young man, whose employer found out about his indebtedness and dismissed him from his position. He then searched in vain for employment for 2 months. One cold night he went to the top of one of the tall buildings on Broadway and jumped off. Debt had claimed another victim. Who told you it couldn't be done? And what great achievement has he to his credit that entitles him to use the word impossible so freely? How to master the fear of poverty. To whip the fear of poverty, one must take 2 very definite steps, providing one is in debt. First, quit the habit of buying on credit, and follow this by gradually paying off the debts that you have already incurred. Being free from the worry of indebtedness, you are ready to revamp the habits of your mind and redirect your course toward prosperity. Adopt as a part of your definite chief aim the habit of saving a regular proportion of your income, even if this be no more than a penny a day. Very soon this habit will begin to lay hold of your mind, and you will actually get joy out of saving. Any habit may be discontinued by building in its place some other and more desirable habit. The spending habit must be replaced by the saving habit by all who attain financial independence. Merely to discontinue an undesirable habit is not enough, as such habits have a tendency to reappear unless the place they formerly occupied in the mind is filled by some other habit of a different nature. The discontinuance of a habit leaves a hole in the mind, and this hole must be filled up with some other form of habit, or the old one will return and claim its place. Throughout this course, many psychological formulas which the student has been requested to memorize and practice have been described. You will find such a formula in Lesson 3, the object of which is to develop self-confidence. These formulas may be assimilated so they become a part of your mental machinery through the law of habit if you will follow the instructions for their use which accompany each of them. It is assumed that you are striving to attain financial independence. The accumulation of money is not difficult after you have once mastered the fear of poverty and developed in its place the habit of saving. The author of this course would be greatly disappointed to know that any student of the course got the impression from anything in this or any of the other lessons that success is measured by dollars alone. However, money does represent an important factor in success, and it must be given its proper value in any philosophy intended to help people in becoming useful, happy, and prosperous. The cold, cruel, relentless truth is that in this age of materialism, a man is no more than so many grains of sand, which may be blown helter-skelter by every stray wind of circumstance, unless he is entrenched behind the power of money. Genius may offer many rewards to those who possess it, but the fact still remains that genius without money with which to give it expression is but an empty, skeleton-like honor. The man without money is at the mercy of the man who has it. And this goes regardless of the amount of ability he may possess, the training he has had, or the native genius with which he was gifted by nature. There is no escape from the fact that people will weigh you very largely in the light of bank balances, no matter who you are or what you can do. The first question that arises in the minds of most people when they meet a stranger is, how much money has he? If he has money, he is welcomed into homes and business opportunities are thrown his way. All sorts of attention are lavished upon him. He is a prince and as such is entitled to the best of the land. But if his shoes are run down at the heels, his clothes are not pressed, his collar is dirty, and he shows plainly the signs of impoverished finances, woe be his lot, for the passing crowd will step on his toes and blow the smoke of disrespect in his face. These are not pretty statements, but they have one virtue: they are true. This tendency to judge people by the money they have or their power to control money is not confined to any one class of people. We all have a touch of it, whether we recognize the fact or not. Thomas A. Edison is one of the best known and most respected inventors in the world, yet it is no misstatement of facts to say that he would have remained a practically unknown, obscure personage had he not followed the habit of conserving his resources and shown his ability to save money. Henry Ford never would have got to first base with his horseless carriage had he not developed, quite early in life, the habit of saving. Moreover, had Mr. Ford not conserved his resources and hedged himself behind their power, he would have been swallowed up by his competitors or those who covetously desired to take his business away from him, long, long years ago. Many a man has gone a very long way toward success, only to stumble and fall, never again to rise, because of lack of money in times of emergency. The mortality rate in business each year, due to lack of reserve capital for emergencies, is stupendous. To this one cause are due more of the business failures than to all other causes combined. Reserve funds are essential in the successful operation of business. Likewise, savings accounts are essential to success on the part of individuals. Without a savings fund, the individual suffers in two ways. First, by inability to seize opportunities that come only to the person with some ready cash, and second, by embarrassment due to some unexpected emergency calling for cash. It might be said also that the individual suffers in still a third respect by not developing the habit of saving, through lack of certain other qualities essential for success, which grow out of the practice of the habit of saving. The nickels, dimes, and pennies which the average person allows to slip through his fingers would, if systematically saved and properly put to work, eventually bring financial independence. Through the courtesy of a prominent building and loan association, the following table has been compiled, showing what a monthly saving of $5, $10, $25, or $50 will amount to at the end of 10 years. These figures are startling when one comes to consider the fact that the average person spends from $5 to $50 a month for useless merchandise or so-called entertainment. The making and saving of money is a science. Every failure, every adversity, every heartache may be a blessing in disguise, providing it softens the animal portion of our nature. The rules by which money is accumulated are so simple that anyone may follow them. The main prerequisite is a willingness to subordinate the present to the future by eliminating unnecessary expenditures for luxuries. A young man who was earning only $20 a week as chauffeur for a prominent New York banker was induced by his employer to keep an accurate account of every cent he spent for 1 week. The following is an itemized list of his expenses. These figures tell a tragic story which might as well apply to thousands of other people as to the young man who kept this account. His actual savings out of $20 were only 53 cents. He spent $7.47 for items, every one of which could have been greatly reduced, and most of which could have been eliminated entirely. In fact, by shaving himself and shining his own shoes, he could have saved every cent of the $7.47. Now turn to the table made up by the Building and Loan Association and observe what the saving of $7.47 a week would amount to. Suppose the amount this young man actually saved had been only $25 a month. The saving would have increased to the snug sum of $5,000 by the end of the first 10 years. The young man in question was 21 years old at the time he kept this expense account. By the time he reached the age of 31 years, he could have had a substantial amount in the bank, had he saved $25 a month, and this saving would have brought him many opportunities that would have led directly to financial independence. Some who are short-sighted pseudo-philosophers are fond of pointing to the fact that no one can become rich merely by saving a few dollars a week. This may be true enough as far as the reasoning goes, which is not very far, but the other side of the story is that the saving of even a small sum of money places one in position where oftentimes this small sum may enable one to take advantage of business opportunities which lead directly and quite rapidly to financial independence. The foregoing table, showing what a saving of $5 a month will amount to at the end of 10 years, should be copied and pasted on your mirror, where it will stare you in the face every morning when you get up and every night as you retire, providing you have not already acquired the habit of systematic saving of money. This table should be reproduced, in letters and figures an inch tall, and placed on the walls of every public school throughout the land, where it might serve as a constant reminder to all school children of the value of the savings habit. Some years ago, before giving serious thought to the value of the savings habit, this author made up an account of the money which had slipped through his fingers. The amount was so alarming that it resulted in the writing of this lesson and adding the habit of saving as one of the 15 laws of success. Following is an itemized statement of this account. This amount, had it been saved and invested as received, in building and loan associations, or in some other manner that would have earned compound interest, would have grown into the sum of $94,000 at the time this lesson is being written. The author is not a victim of any of the usual habits of dissipation, such as gambling, drinking, and excessive entertaining. It is almost unbelievable that a man whose habits of living are reasonably moderate could spend $47,000 within a little over 10 years without having anything to show for the money, but it can be done. A capital reserve of $94,000, working at compound interest, is sufficient to give any man all the financial freedom he needs. I recall one occasion when the president of a large corporation sent me a check for $500 for an address I delivered at a banquet given to the employees, and I distinctly recall what went through my mind when I opened the letter and saw the check. I had wanted a new automobile, and this check was exactly the amount required for the first payment. I had it spent before it had been in my hands 30 seconds. Perhaps this is the experience of the majority of people. They think more of how they are going to spend what they have than they do about ways and means of saving. The idea of saving and the self-control and self-sacrifice which must accompany it is always accompanied by thoughts of an unpleasant nature, but oh, how it does thrill one to think of spending. There is a reason for this, and that reason is the fact that most of us have developed the habit of spending while neglecting the habit of saving, and any idea that frequents the human mind but seldom is not as welcome as that which frequents it often. In truth, the habit of saving can be made as fascinating as the habit of spending, but not until it has become a regular, well-grounded, systematic habit. We like to do that which is often repeated, which is but another way of stating what the scientists have discovered, that we are victims of our habits. The habit of saving money requires more force of character than most people have developed, for the reason that saving means self-denial and sacrifice of amusements and pleasures in scores of different ways. For this very reason, one who develops the savings habit acquires, at the same time, many of the other needed habits which lead to success, especially self-control, self-confidence, courage, poise, and freedom from fear. How much should one save? The first question that will arise is, how much should one save? The answer cannot be given in a few words, for the amount one should save depends upon many conditions, some of which may be within one's control and some of which may not be. Generally speaking, a man who works for a salary should apportion his income about as follows: savings account, 20% living, clothes, food, and shelter, 50% education, 10% recreation, 10% life insurance, 10% 100% careful analysis of 178 men who are known to be successful disclosed the fact that all had failed many times before arriving. The following, however, indicates the approximate distribution which the average man actually makes of his income: savings account, nothing living, clothes, food, and shelter, 60% education, 0% recreation, 35% life insurance, 5% 100% under the item of recreation is included, of course, many expenditures that do not really recreate, such as money spent for alcoholic drinks, dinner parties, and other similar items which may actually serve to undermine one's health and destroy character. An experienced analyst of men has stated that he could tell very accurately, by examining a man's monthly budget, what sort of a life the man is living, moreover, that he will get most of his information from the one item of recreation. This, then, is an item to be watched as carefully as the greenhouse keeper watches the thermometer which controls the life and death of his plants. Those who keep budget accounts often include an item called entertainment, which, in a majority of cases, turns out to be an evil because it depletes the income heavily, and when carried to excess depletes also the health. We are living right now in an age when the item of entertainment is altogether too high in most budget allowances. Tens of thousands of people who earn not more than $50 a week are spending as much as 1/3 of their incomes for what they call entertainment, which comes in a bottle with a questionable label on it at anywhere from $6 to $12 a quart. Not only are these unwise people wasting the money that should go into a savings fund, but of far greater danger, they are destroying both character and health. Nothing in this lesson is intended as a preachment on morality or on any other subject. We are here dealing with cold facts which, to a large extent, constitute the building materials out of which success may be created. However, this is an appropriate place to state some facts which have such a direct bearing on the subject of achieving success that they cannot be omitted without weakening this entire course in general, and this lesson in particular. The author of this course is not a reformer, neither is he a preacher on morals, as this field of useful endeavor is quite well covered by others who are able workers. What is here stated, therefore, is intended as a necessary part of a course of philosophy whose purpose is to mark a safe road over which one may travel to honorable achievement. During the year 192-6, the author was in partnership with the late Don R. Mellett, who was, at that time, the publisher of the Canton, Ohio, Daily News. Mr. Mellett became interested in the law of success philosophy because it offered, as he believed, sound counsel to young men and young women who really wished to get ahead in life. Through the pages of the Daily News, Mr. Mellett was conducting a fierce battle against the underworld forces of Canton. With the aid of detectives and investigators, some of whom were supplied by the governor of Ohio, Mr. Mellett and the author gathered accurate data concerning the way most of the people in Canton were living. In July 192-6, Mr. Mellett was assassinated from ambush, and 4 men, one of them a former member of the Canton police force, are now serving life sentences in the Ohio State Penitentiary for the crime. During the investigation into crime conditions in Canton, all reports came to the author's office, and the data here described are, therefore, known to be absolutely accurate. One of the officials of a large industrial plant whose salary was $6,000 a year paid a Canton bootlegger an average of $300 a month for the liquor, if stuff can be called liquor, which he used for entertaining. His wife participated in these entertainments, which took place in his own home. A paying teller in a bank whose salary was $150 a month was spending an average of $75 a month for liquor, and in addition to this unpardonable waste of money, out of a salary which was none too great at most, he was traveling at a pace and with a crowd which meant ruin for him later on. The superintendent of a large manufacturing plant, whose salary was $5,000 a year, and who should have been saving at least $125 a month, was actually saving nothing. His bootlegger's bill averaged $150 a month. A policeman whose income was $160 a month was spending over $400 a month on dinner parties at a nearby roadhouse. Where he got the difference between his legitimate income and his actual expenditures is a question that reflects no particular credit on the policeman. A bank official whose income, as near as it could be estimated from his previous year's income tax reports, was about $8,000 a year, had a monthly bootlegger's bill of more than $500 during the 3 months that his activities were checked by the Mellett investigators. A young man who worked in a department store at a salary of $20 a week was spending an average of $35 a week with one bootlegger. The assumption was that he was stealing the difference from his employer. Old man trouble awaited this young man just around the corner, although it is not known by the author whether or not the two have come together as yet. A salesman for a life insurance company, whose income was not known because he worked on a commission basis, was spending an average of $200 a month with one bootlegger. No record of any savings account was found, and the assumption is that he had none. This assumption was later confirmed when the company for which the young man worked had him arrested for embezzlement of its funds. No doubt he was spending the money which he should have turned into the company. He is now serving a long sentence in the Ohio State Penitentiary. A young lad who was attending high school was spending large sums for liquor. The actual amount was not obtainable for the reason that he paid cash as he got the liquor, and the bootlegger's records did not, therefore, disclose the actual amount. Later, this boy's parents had him locked up to save him from himself. It was found that he was stealing money from a savings fund kept by his mother, somewhere about the house. He had stolen and spent more than $300 of this money when discovered. This author conducted a lecture bureau in 41 high schools, where he lectured once a month during the entire school season. The principals of these high schools stated that less than 2% of the students showed any tendency toward saving money, and an examination through the aid of a questionnaire prepared for that purpose disclosed the fact that only 5% of the students, out of a total of 11,000, of the high school age, believed that the savings habit was one of the essentials for success. It is no wonder the rich are becoming richer and the poor are becoming poorer. Call this a socialistic statement, if you please, but the facts bear out its accuracy. It is not difficult for any man to become rich in a country of spendthrifts such as this, where millions of people spend every cent that comes into their possession. Many years ago, before the present wave of mania for spending spread over the country, F.W. Woolworth devised a very simple method of catching the nickels and dimes that millions of people throw away for trash, and his system netted him over 100 million dollars in a few years' time. Woolworth has died, but his system of saving nickels and dimes continues, and his estate is growing bigger and bigger. 5 and 10 cent stores are usually painted with a bright red front. That is an appropriate color, for red denotes danger. Every 5 and 10 cent store is all salesmen will do well to remember that no one wants anything that someone else is trying to get rid of. striking monument that proves, to a nicety, that one of the cardinal faults of this generation is the spending habit. We are all victims of habit. Unfortunately for most of us, we are reared by parents who have no conception whatsoever of the psychology of habit, and without being aware of their fault, most parents aid and abet their offspring in the development of the spending habit by overindulgence with spending money, and by lack of training in the habit of saving. The habits of early childhood cling to us all through life. Fortunate indeed is the child whose parents have the foresight and the understanding of the value, as a character builder, of the habit of saving, to inculcate this habit in the minds of their children. It is a training that yields rich rewards. Give the average man $100 that he did not contemplate receiving, and what will he do with it? Why, he will begin to cogitate in his own mind on how he can spend the money. Dozens of things that he needs or thinks he needs will flash into his mind, but it is a rather safe bet that it will never occur to him, unless he has acquired the savings habit, to make this $100 the beginning of a savings account. Before night comes, he will have the $100 spent, or at least he will have decided in his mind how he is going to spend it, thus adding more fuel to the already too bright flame of habit of spending. We are ruled by our habits. It requires force of character, determination, and power of firm decision to open a savings account and then add to it a regular, if small, portion of all subsequent income. There is one rule by which any man may determine, well in advance, whether or not he will ever enjoy the financial freedom and independence which is so universally desired by all men, and this rule has absolutely nothing to do with the amount of one's income. The rule is that if a man follows the systematic habit of saving a definite proportion of all money he earns or receives in other ways, he is practically sure to place himself in a position of financial independence. If he saves nothing, he is absolutely sure never to be financially independent, no matter how much his income may be. The one and only exception to this rule is that a man who does not save might possibly inherit such a large sum of money that he could not spend it, or he might inherit it under a trust which would protect it for him, but these eventualities are rather remote. So much so, in fact, that you cannot rely upon such a miracle happening to you. This author enjoys a rather close acquaintance with many hundreds of people throughout the United States and in some foreign countries. For nearly 25 years he has been watching many of these acquaintances, and knows, therefore, from actual experience how they live, why some of them have failed while others have succeeded, and the reasons for both failure and success. This list of acquaintances covers men who control hundreds of millions of dollars and actually own many millions which they have acquired. Also men who have had millions of dollars, all of which passed through their fingers, and they are now penniless. For the purpose of showing the student of this philosophy just how the law of habit becomes a sort of pivotal point on which success or failure turns, and exactly why no man can become financially independent without developing the habit of systematic saving, the living habits of some of these many acquaintances will be described. We will begin with a complete history, in his own words, of a man who has made $1 million in the field of advertising, but who now has nothing to show for his efforts. This story first appeared in the American magazine, and it is here reprinted through the courtesy of the publishers of that publication. The story is true in every respect, and it has been included as a part of this lesson because the author of the story, Mr. W. Freeman, is willing to have his mistakes made public with the hope that others may avoid them. I have made $1 million dollars, but I haven't got a cent. While it is embarrassing, yes, humiliating, publicly to confess to an outstanding fault that has made a good deal of a mess of my life today, nevertheless I have decided to make this confession for the good it may do. I am going to make a clean breast of how I let slip through my fingers all the money I have earned thus far in my lifetime, which approximates $1 million. This amount I made through my work in the field of advertising, except a few $1,000s I earned up to 25 years of age by teaching in country schools and by writing newsletters to some country weeklies and daily newspapers. Maybe one lone million does not seem a lot of money in these days of many millions and even billions, but it is a big sum of money just the same. If there are any who think to the contrary, let them count $1 million. I tried to figure out the other night how long it would take to do so. I found I could count an average of 100 a minute. On this basis, it would take me 20 days of 8 hours each, plus 6 hours and 40 minutes on the 21st day to do the stunt. I doubt very much if you or I were given an assignment to count 1 million $1 bills, upon the promise that all of them would be ours at the end of that time, that we could complete it. It would probably drive us mad, and a lot of use the money would be to us then, wouldn't it? Let me say at the outset of my story that I do not regret, not for 1 minute, that I spent 90% of the money I made. To wish any of this 90% back at this time would make me feel that I would have denied much happiness to my family and to many others. My only regret is that I spent all of my money and more besides. If I had today the 10% I could have saved easily, I would have $100,000 safely invested and no debts. If I had this money, I would feel really and truly that one was rich. And I mean just this, for I have never had a desire to accumulate money for money's sake. Those school teaching and newspaper correspond and said days of mine brought some cares and responsibilities, but they were met optimistically. I married at the age of 21 with the full approval of parents on both sides, who believed thoroughly in the doctrine preached by Henry Ward Beecher, that early marriages are virtuous marriages. Just 1 month and 1 day after I was married, my father met a tragic death. He was suffocated by coal gas. Having been an educator all his life, and one of the best, he had not accumulated any money. When he passed out of our family circle, it was up to all of us to pull together and get along somehow, which we did. Apart from the void left in our home by my father's death, my wife and I and my mother and only sister lived together. We had a joyful life, despite the fact that it was a tight squeeze to make ends meet. My mother, who was exceptionally talented and resourceful, she had taught school with my father until I was born, decided to open our home to a married couple, old friends of the family. They came to live with us and their board helped to pay expenses. My mother was known far and wide for the wonderful meals she served. Later on, 2 well-to-do women friends of the family were taken into our home, thus increasing our revenue. My sister helped very substantially by teaching a kindergarten class, which met in the big living room of our home. My wife contributed her share to the household by taking charge of the sewing and mending. Think well before you speak, because your words may plant the seed of either success or failure in the mind of some other person. Those were very happy days. Nobody in the household was extravagant or had any extravagant tendencies except perhaps myself, for I was always inclined to be free with money. I liked to make gifts to the family and to entertain friends. When the first baby came into our home, a boy, we all thought heaven had opened its doors to us. My wife's parents, who took the keenest and deepest interest in our affairs, and who were always ready to lend a helping hand, were equally happy over the coming of their first grandchild. My brother-in-law, much older than my wife and a bachelor, could not understand at first the joy we all felt, but even he began to strut around like a proud peacock after a while. What a difference a baby makes in a home. I am injecting these details into my story merely to emphasize how the early days of my life were lived. I had no opportunity to spend much money, and yet I had as much happiness in those days as I have ever had since. The strange thing about it all is that the experience of those days did not teach me the value of money. If anybody ever had a practical lesson to guide him in his future, I certainly had it. But let me tell you how this early experience affected me. The birth of my son inspired me to do something that would make more money than I was getting at teaching school and in writing for newspapers. I did not want my wife, mother, and sister to feel that they would have to continue indefinitely to do their part in sustaining the household. Why should a fellow big and strong and healthy as I have always been, and with a reasonable amount of ability, be content to remain a spoke in the wheel? Why shouldn't I be the whole wheel, as far as providing for the family was concerned? Following my desire to make more money, I took on the selling of books in addition to teaching and writing for newspapers. This earned for me quite a little extra money. Finally, I gave up teaching and concentrated on selling books and writing for newspapers. My book selling took me to Bridgeton, New Jersey. It was here that I got my first real start in money. I had to be away from home a great deal to do this work, but the sacrifice was worthwhile. I earned enough money in a few weeks to send more money home than I had contributed to the household in any year from my school teaching and newspaper correspondence. After combing the territory in the Bridgeton zone, I became interested in a newspaper in that city, the Morning Star. It seemed to me that the editor and publisher of this paper needed a helper. I called on him and told him so. He said, "Heavens, young man, how can I hire you? I am not earning enough money to pay for my own living." "That's just it," said I. "I believe together we can make the Star a success. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll work for you for 1 week for $1 a day. At the end of the week, if I have made good, I'll expect you to pay me $3 a day for the second week. And then, if I continue to do well, I'll expect you to pay me $6 a day for the third week, and we'll continue from then on until the paper makes enough money to pay me $50 a week." The owner agreed to my proposition. At the end of 2 months, I was being paid $50 a week, which in those days was considered a big salary. I began to feel that I was well on my way toward making money, but all I wanted it for was to make my family more comfortable. $50 a week was just 4 times as much as I had made teaching school. My job on the Star embraced editorial writing, not very brilliant, reporting just ordinary, the writing and selling of advertisements fairly successful, proofreading, bill collecting, and so forth. It kept me humping 6 days a week, but I could stand it, for I was strong and healthy, and besides, the work was very interesting. I also contributed correspondence to the New York Sun, Philadelphia Record, and the Trenton N.J. Times, which brought me in an average of $150 a month, for this was a good news territory. I learned a lesson on the Star which eventually shaped the course of my life. I found out that there is a great deal more money to be earned by selling advertising for newspapers than in writing for them. Advertising brings grist to the mill. I put over one advertising stunt on the Star, a write-up of the South Jersey oyster industry, paid for by the oyster men, that brought in $3,000 cash, which the publisher divided with me 50-50. I had never seen so much money at one time in all my life. Think of it, $1,500, 25% more than I had made in 2 years of school teaching and odd tasks. Did I save this money or any part of it? I did not. What was the use? I could do so much with it to make my wife, boy, mother, and sister happy that I let it go far easier than I had made it. But would it not have been a fine thing if I had put this money away for a rainy day? My work in Brighton attracted the attention of Sam Hudson, New Jersey correspondent of the Philadelphia Record, who was a shining example of that type of newspaper men whose greatest pleasure in life is doing things for others. Sam told me that it was time for me to get located in a big city. He thought I had it in me to make good. He said he would get me a job in Philadelphia. He did, and I moved with my wife and baby to Germantown. I was given charge of the advertising department of the Germantown, Philadelphia Gazette, a weekly newspaper. At the start, I did not make as much money as I had earned in Brighton because I had to give up my newspaper correspondence. The news for this section was covered by other correspondents, but very soon I was making 25% more money. The Gazette increased its size 3 times to accommodate its advertising, and each time I received a very substantial increase in salary. In addition to this, I was given a job to gather social news for the Sunday edition of the Philadelphia Press. Bradford Merrill, managing editor of that newspaper, now a very important New York newspaper executive, assigned me a big territory to cover. This kept me busy every night in the week except Saturdays. I was paid $5 a column, but I averaged 7 columns every Sunday, which made me $35 a week extra. It was more money for me to spend, and I spent it. I did not know anything about budgeting my expenses. I just let it go as it came. I did not have time, or thought I hadn't, to watch my step in spending. A year later, I was invited to join the advertising staff of the Philadelphia Press, a big opportunity for a young man, for I got wonderful training under the management of William McLean, now the owner of the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin. I still retained my job as gatherer of social news, so my income was just about the same as I had been making in Germantown. But before long, my work attracted the attention of James Elverson, Sr., publisher of the Old Saturday Night and Golden Days, who had just purchased the Philadelphia Inquirer. I was offered and accepted the advertising management of this newspaper. This meant a big increase in my income, and soon afterward there came a happy increase in my family, the birth of a daughter. Then I was able to do what I had longed to do since the birth of my son. I got the family together again under one roof, my wife and 2 babies, my mother and sister. At last I was able to relieve my mother of any cares or responsibilities, and never again did she have either as long as she lived. She died in her 81st year, 25 years after my father's death. I shall never forget her last words to me. "Will, you have never caused me a moment's worry since you were born, and I could not have had more than you have given me had I been the Queen of England." I was making at this time 4 times more money than my father had made as superintendent of public schools in my hometown of Phillipsburg, New Jersey. I am thankful that I was born poor, that I did not come into this world burdened by the whims of wealthy parents, with a bag of gold around my neck. All the money, however, passed out of my pockets as easily as water flows through a sieve. Expenses increased with every increase in my income, which is the habit, I suppose, with most people. There was no sane reason, though, for letting my expenses go beyond my income, which I did. I found myself piling up debts, and from this time on I was never out of debt. I did not worry about my debts, though, for I thought I could pay them off at any time. It never occurred to me, not until fully 25 years later, that debt eventually would bring upon me not only great anxiety and unhappiness, but that I would lose friends and credit as well. But I must pat myself on the back for one thing. I was giving full rein to my big faults, spending money as fast as I made it, often faster, but I never shirked my work. I was always trying to find more things to do, and I always found them. I spent very little time with my family. I would go home to dinner every night and romp with the babies until their bedtime, then I would return to the office and often work. So the years went by. Another daughter arrived. Presently I wanted my daughters to have a pony and cart, and I wanted my son to have a riding horse. Then I thought I needed a team to take me around with the family, driving them to a closed coop or an open trap. I got them all. Instead of one horse and a carry-all, or perhaps a team, which would have been sufficient for our needs and something we could have afforded, I had to have a stable with all that goes with it. This outfit cost me nearly 1/4 of my annual income. Then I took up golf. This was in my 41st year. I went at my play the same as I went at my work, put my whole heart in it. I learned to play pretty well. My son and elder daughter played with me, and they learned to play well, too. It was necessary that my younger daughter should spend the winter in the South and summers in the Adirondacks. But instead of her mother going with her alone, I felt it would be fine if the son and other daughter went along with them. This arrangement was carried out. They went to Pinehurst, North Carolina, every winter and to expensive resorts in the Adirondacks or in New Hampshire in the summer. All this took a great deal of money. My son and elder daughter were keen about golf and spent a lot of money on it. I also disbursed quite a little on golf courses around New York. Between the three of us we won 80 prizes, most of which are now in storage. I sat down one day and calculated what these prizes had cost me. I discovered that each trophy had cost $250 or a total of $45,000 over a period of 15 years, an average of $3,000 a year. Ridiculous, wasn't it? I entertained lavishly at my home. Montclair folks thought I was a millionaire. I frequently invited groups of businessmen to have a day of golf at the club, and then to have dinner with me in the eve. They would have been satisfied with a plain home dinner, but no, I must serve them an elaborate affair staged by a famous caterer. These dinners never cost less than $10 a plate, which did not include to money spent for music while they were dining. I had a Negro quartet come to the house. Our dining room comfortably seated 20 people, and it was filled to capacity many times. It was all very lovely, and I was glad to be their host. In fact, I was very happy over it. I never stopped to think how rapidly I was piling up debts. The day came when they began to bother me a lot. I had entertained so many guests at the golf club one month, paying for luncheons, cigars, and greens fees, that my bill was $450. This attracted the attention of the directors of the club, who were all good friends of mine and very much interested in my welfare. They made it their business to tell me that I was spending entirely too much money, and they wished for my sake that I could check my expenses. This gave me a bit of a jolt. It made me think seriously long enough to get rid of my horses and traps, at a big sacrifice, of course. I gave up our home and moved back to the city, but I did not leave any unpaid bills in Montclair. I borrowed the money to pay them. It was always easy for me to get all the money I wanted, despite my well-known financial shortcomings. Here are 2 sidelights on my experience during my flaring 40s. Besides spending money foolishly and perhaps recklessly, I loaned it with equal abandon. In cleaning out my desk at home before moving to the city, I looked over a package of due bills, the total of which was over $40,000. That was money handed out to just anybody who came along. I tore them all up. But I realized that if I had that money in hand, I wouldn't owe a dollar. One of the prosperous businessmen I had entertained many times and who in turn had entertained me said to me, "Billy, I've got to stop going on outings with you. You spend entirely too much money for me. I can't keep up with you." Think of that coming from a man who was making more money than I was. It should have struck home, but it didn't. I went on spending just the same, and foolishly thinking that I was having a good time, and with no thought of the future. This man is now one of the vice presidents of one of New York's greatest financial institutions, and is reported to be worth many millions of dollars. I should have taken his advice. In the fall of 198, after my disastrous experience of 6 months in another line of business, following my resignation from the Hearst organization, I resume newspaper work as advertising manager of the New York Evening Mail. I had known Henry L. Stoddard, editor and owner, back in the Philadelphia days when he was political correspondent for the press. Despite the fact that I was bothered by debts, R did the best work of my life on the Evening Mail and made more money during the 5 years I was associated with it than I had ever made before. Moreover, Mr. Stoddard gave me the privilege of syndicating advertising talks, which ran in his paper for 1,000 consecutive publication days, and earned for me more than $55,000. Mr. Stoddard was very generous in many other ways, and frequently paid me special sums of money for doing what he considered unusual things in the way of developing business. During this period, I was so deeply in debt that, in order to keep things moving as smoothly as possible, but without retrenching in the slightest way in my expenses, I borrowed money from Peter to pay Paul and from Paul to pay Peter. That item of $55,000 earned from syndicating advertising talks would have more than paid all my debts and left a nice nest egg besides. But all of it was spent as easily as though I hadn't a care in the world. In 191 I went on my own in the advertising business. From that time until the spring of 192, my fees ran into very big figures. I was still making more money than I ever did and was spending it just as fast as I made it, until finally my friends got tired of making me loans. If I had shown the slightest inclination to curb my expenses to the extent of only 10%, these wonderful men would have been willing to divide 50-50 with me, letting me pay them 5% of it and saving 5%. They did not care so much about the return of the money they had loaned me as that they wanted to see me pull myself together. The crash in my affairs came 5 years ago. 2 friends who had stood by me loyally became impatient and told me frankly that I needed a drastic lesson. They gave it to me all right. I was forced into bankruptcy, which nearly broke my heart. I felt that every person I knew was pointing the finger of scorn at me. This was very foolish. While there was comment, it was not at all unfriendly. It was expressive of keen regret that a man who had attained so much prestige in his profession and had earned so fortunate is the person who has learned that the most certain way to get is to first give through some sort of useful service. Much money should have allowed himself to get into financial difficulties. Proud and sensitive to the core, I felt the disgrace of bankruptcy so keenly that I decided to go to Florida, where I had once done a special piece of work for a client. It seemed to me to be the coming El Dorado. I figured that maybe I could make sufficient money in a few years so that I could return to New York, not only with a competency, but with enough to pay all my debts in full. For a time it looked as though I would realize this ambition, but I was caught in the big real estate collapse. So here I am back in the old town where I once had big earning power and hundreds of friends and well-wishers. It has been a strange experience. One thing is certain, I have learned my lesson at last. I feel sure that opportunities will come my way to redeem myself and that my earning power will be restored to me. And when that time comes, I know that I shall be able to live as well as I ever did on 40% of my income. Then I shall divide the remaining 60% into 2 parts, setting aside 30% to pay my creditors and 30% for insurance and savings. If I allowed myself to feel depressed over my past or filled my mind with worries, I would not be capable of carrying on the fight to redeem myself. Besides, I would be ungrateful to my Maker for having endowed me with wonderful health all my life. Is there any greater blessing? I would be ungrateful to the memory of my parents, whose splendid training has kept me anchored pretty safely to moral standards. Slipping from moral moorings is infinitely more serious, in the end, than slipping from the thrift standard. I would lack appreciation of the encouragement and support I have had in generous measure from hundreds of businessmen, and to many good friends who helped me build a fine reputation in my profession. These memories are the sunshine of my life, and I shall use them to pave the way to my future achievement. With abundance of health, unfaltering faith, unflagging energy, unceasing optimism, and unbounded confidence that a man can win his fight, even though he commences late in life to realize the kind of fight he must make, is there anything but death to stop him? Mr. Freeman's story is the same as that which might be told by thousands of other men who save nothing, with the exception that the amounts of their incomes would vary. The manner of living, the way the money was spent, and why, as told in Mr. Freeman's narrative, show the way the spender's mind works. Compilation of statistics covering family incomes and expenditures of over 16,000 families of men who have been analyzed by the author disclosed some facts that will be of help to the person who wishes to reprint it by courtesy of the American magazine. Copyright the Crowell Publishing Company, 192.7. Budget his income and disbursements on a practical working basis that is sound and economical. The average income runs all the way from $100 to $300 per month. The budget allowance covering incomes within these two amounts should be about as follows. A family consisting of 2 persons, whose income is $100 a month, should manage to set aside at least $10 or $12 a month for the savings account. The cost of shelter or rent should not exceed $25 or $30 a month. Food costs should average about $25 to $30. Clothing should be kept within an expenditure of $15 to $20 a month. Recreation and incidentals should be kept down to about $8 to $10 a month. A family whose income is $100 a month, should that income be increased to $125, ought to save at least $20 of the amount. A family of 2 persons whose income is $150 a month should budget their funds about as follows. Savings $25, shelter or rent $35 to $40, food $35 to $40, clothes $20 to $30, recreation $10 to $15. On a salary of $200 a month, the budget should be savings $50, shelter or rent $40 to $50, food $35 to $45, clothes $30 to $35, recreation $15 to $20. A family of 2 on a salary or income of $300 a month should apportion the income about thus: savings $55 to $65, shelter or rent $45 to $60, food $45 to $60, clothes $35 to $45, recreation and education $50 to $75. Some might argue that a family of 2, making a rye of $300 a month, might live just as cheaply as one making but $100 or $125. However, this is not quite correct, because one who has the ability to earn $300 a month must as a rule associate with people who make better appearances and more entertainment necessary. A single man earning $100, $150 or $300 a month should save considerably more than a man with a family could save on the same amounts. As a rule, a single man who has no dependents and who is not in debt should live on a budget of $50 a month for room and food, and not to exceed $30 a month for clothes and perhaps $10 for recreation. These amounts might be slightly increased by one who earned from $150 to $300 a month. A boy who lives away from home and whose weekly income is only $20 should save $5 of the amount. The remainder should cover cost of food, room, and clothes. A girl living away from home on the same income would require a slightly larger allowance for clothes, as women's wearing apparel is more costly than men's, and it is generally imperative that women watch, more closely than men, their personal appearance. A family of 3 will be able to save considerably less than the amounts which can be saved by a family of 2. With rare exceptions, however, such as cases where the family is involved in debt which must be absorbed out of the monthly income, any family can save at least 5% of the gross income. It is a common practice today for families to purchase automobiles on monthly payments which involve too great an expenditure compared to their income. A man with a Ford income has no business purchasing a Studebaker car. He should curb his desires and content himself with a Ford. Many single men spend their entire incomes and often go into debt besides because they maintain automobiles out of keeping with their incomes. This common practice is fatal to success as far as financial independence may be considered a part of success in thousands of instances. The installment plan of buying has become so common, and it is so easy to purchase practically anything one desires, that the tendency to spend out of proportion to one's income is rapidly increasing. This tendency must be curbed by the person who has made up his mind to gain financial independence. It can be done by anyone who is willing to try. Another evil, which is both an evil and a blessing, is the fact that this country is so very prosperous that money comes easily, and if not watched, it goes still more easily. Since the beginning of the World War, there has been a steady demand for practically everything manufactured in the United States, and this condition of prosperity has caused people to lapse into a state of careless, unjustified spending. There is no virtue in keeping up with the pace set by neighbors, when this means sacrifice of the habit of saving a regular part of one's income. It is far better in the long run to be considered a bit behind the times than it is to go along through youth, into the days of maturity, and finally into old age, without having formed the habit of systematic saving. It is better to sacrifice during the age of youthfulness than it is to be compelled to do so during the age of maturity, as all who have not developed the habit of saving generally have to do. There is nothing quite so humiliating that carries I am thankful for the adversities which have crossed my pathway, for they have taught me tolerance, sympathy, self-control, perseverance, and some other virtues I might never have known. Such great agony and suffering as poverty in old age, when personal services are no longer marketable, and one must turn to relatives or to charitable institutions for existence. A budget system should be maintained by every person, both the married and the single, but no budget system will work out if the person trying to keep it lacks the courage to cut expenses on such items as those of entertainment and recreation. If you feel so weak in willpower that you think it necessary to keep up with the Smiths with whom you associate socially, and whose income is greater than your own, or who spend all of their income foolishly, then no budget system can be of service to you. Forming the savings habit means that, to some extent at least, you must seclude yourself from all except a well-selected group of friends who enjoy you without elaborate entertaining on your part. To admit that you lack the courage to trim down your expenditures so that you can save money, even if only a small amount, is the equivalent of admitting at the same time a lack of the sort of character which leads to success. It has been proved times too numerous to be mentioned that people who have formed the habit of saving money are always given preference in positions of responsibility. Therefore, the saving of money not only adds advantages in the nature of preferred employment and a larger bank account, but it also increases the actual earning capacity. Any businessman will prefer to employ a person who saves money regularly, not because of the mere fact that such person saves money, but because of the characteristics possessed by such a person which make him or her more efficient. Many firms will not employ a man or a woman who does not save money. It should be a common practice for all business houses to require all employees to save money. This would be a blessing to thousands of people who would not otherwise have the willpower to form the savings habit. Henry Ford has gone a very long way, perhaps as far as is expedient, to induce his employees not only to save their money, but to spend what they do spend wisely, and to live sanely and economically. The man who induces his employees to form the habit of saving is a practical philanthropist. Opportunities that come to those who have saved money. A few years ago, a young man came to Philadelphia from the farming district of Pennsylvania and went to work in a printing plant. One of his fellow workmen owned some shares in a building and loan company and had formed the habit of saving $5 a week through this association. This young man was influenced by his associate to open an account with the building and loan company. At the end of 3 years, he had saved $900. The printing plant for which he worked got into financial difficulty and was about to fail. He came to the rescue with his $900 which he had saved in small amounts, and in return was given a half interest in the business. By inaugurating a system of close economy, he helped the business to pay off its indebtedness, and today he is drawing out of it, as his half of the profits, a little better than $25,000 a year. This opportunity never would have come, or if it had, he would not have been prepared to embrace it, had he not formed the habit of saving money. When the Ford automobile was perfected, during the early days of its existence, Henry Ford needed capital to promote the manufacture and sale of his product. He turned to a few friends who had saved up a few $1,000s, one of whom was Senator Couzens. These friends came to his rescue, put in a few $1,000s with him, and later drew out millions of dollars in profits. When Woolworth first started his 5 and 10-cent store plan, he had no capital, but he turned to a few friends who had saved, by the closest sort of economy and great sacrifice, a few $1,000s. These friends staked him, and later they were paid back hundreds of thousands of dollars in profits. Van Heusen, of soft collar fame, conceived the idea of producing a semi-soft collar for men. His idea was sound, but he had not a cent to promote it. He turned to a few friends who had only a few $100s who gave him a start, and the collar made each of them wealthy. The men who started the El Producto cigar business had but little capital, and what they did have was money they had saved from their small earnings as cigar makers. They had a good idea and knew how to make a good cigar, but the idea would have died abornin had they not saved a little money. With their meager savings they launched the cigar, and a few years later they sold out their business to the American Tobacco Company for $8 million. Back of practically every great fortune one may find as its beginning a well-developed habit of saving money. John D. Rockefeller was an ordinary bookkeeper. He conceived the idea of developing the oil business, which was then not even considered a business. He needed capital, and because he had developed the habit of saving, and had thereby proved that he could conserve the funds of other people, he had no difficulty in borrowing what money he needed. It may be truthfully stated that the real basis of the Rockefeller fortune is the habit of saving money which Mr. Rockefeller developed while working as a bookkeeper at a salary of $40 a month. James J. Hill was a poor young man working as a telegrapher at a salary of $30 a month. He conceived the idea of the Great Northern Railway system, but his idea was out of proportion to his ability to finance. However, he had formed the habit of saving money, and on the meager salary of $30 a month had saved enough to enable him to pay his expenses on a trip to Chicago, where he interested capitalists in financing his plan. The fact that he himself had saved money on a small salary was considered good evidence that he would be a safe man to trust with other people's money. Most businessmen will not trust another man with their money unless he has demonstrated his ability to take care of his own and use it wisely. The test, while it is often embarrassing to those who have not formed the habit of saving, is a very practical one. A young man who worked in a printing plant in the city of Chicago wanted to open a small print shop and go into business for himself. He went to a printing supply house manager and made known his wants, saying he desired credit for a printing press and some type and other small equipment. The first question asked by the manager was, "Have you saved any money of your own?" He had. Out of his salary of $30 a week, he had saved $15 a week regularly for nearly 4 years. He got the credit he wanted. Later on he got more credit, until today he has built up one of the most successful printing plants in the city of Chicago. His name is George B. Williams, and he is well known, as are also the facts here stated, to the author of this course. Many years after this incident, the author of this course became acquainted with Mr. Williams, and at the end of the war in 191 the author went to Mr. Williams and asked for credit amounting to many thousands of dollars for the purpose of publishing the Golden Rule magazine. The first question asked was, "Have you formed the habit of saving money?" Despite the fact that all the money I had saved was lost in the war, the mere fact that I had actually formed the savings habit was the real basis on which I got credit for upward of $30,000. There are opportunities on every corner, but they exist only for those who have ready money, or who can command money because they have formed the habit of saving, and developed the other characteristics which go with the formation of the savings habit known by the general term of character. Love and justice are the real arbiters of all disputes. Give them a chance and you will no longer want to defeat a brother sojourner by the wayside of life. The late J.P. Morgan once said he would rather loan $1 million to a man of sound character who had formed the habit of saving money than he would $1,000 to a man without character who was a spendthrift. Generally speaking, this is the attitude which the world takes toward all men who save money. It often happens that a small savings account of no more than $200 or $300 is sufficient to start one on the highway to financial independence. A few years ago, a young inventor invented a household article which was unique and practical. He was handicapped, as inventors so often are, because he did not have the money to market his invention. Moreover, not having formed the savings habit, he found it impossible to borrow money through banking sources. His roommate was a young machinist who had saved $200. He came to the inventor's aid with this small sum of money and had enough of the articles manufactured to give them a start. They went out and sold from house to house, the first supply, then came back and had another supply made up, and so on until they had accumulated, thanks to the thrift and savings ability of the roommate, a capital of $1,000. With this, plus some credit they secured, they bought the tools for manufacturing their own product. The young machinist sold his half interest in the business 6 years later for $250,000. He never would have handled this much money during his entire life had he not formed the habit of saving, which enabled him to come to the rescue of his inventor friend. This case might be multiplied 1,000 times, with but slight variation as to details, as it is fairly descriptive of the beginning of many great fortunes that have been made and are now in the making in the United States. It may seem like a sad, cruel fact, but it is a fact nonetheless that if you have no money and have not developed the habit of saving, you are out of luck as far as availing yourself of the opportunity to make money is concerned. It can do no harm to repeat. In fact, it should be repeated over and over again, that the real start of nearly all fortunes, whether great or small, is the formation of the habit of saving money. Get this basic principle firmly founded in your mind, and you will be well on the road toward financial independence. It is a sad sight to see a man, well along in years, who has sentenced himself to the wearisome treadmill of hard labor all the days of his life because he has neglected forming the habit of saving money, yet there are millions of such men living in the United States alone today. The greatest thing in life is freedom. There can be no real freedom without a reasonable degree of financial independence. It is a terrible thing to be compelled to be at a certain place, at a certain task, perhaps a task which one does not like, for a certain number of hours every working day of the week, for a whole lifetime. In some ways, this is the same as being in prison, since one's choice of action is always limited. It is really no better than being in prison with the privilege of a trustee, and in some ways it is even worse because the man who is imprisoned has escaped the responsibility of providing a place to sleep, something to eat, and clothes to wear. The only hope of escape from this lifelong toil which curtails freedom is to form the habit of saving money and then live up to that habit, no matter how much sacrifice it may require. There is no other way out for millions of people, and unless you are one of the rare exceptions, this lesson and all these statements of fact are meant for you and apply to you. Neither a borrower nor a lender be. For loan oft loses both itself and friend, and borrowing dulls the edge of husbandry. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow, as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. Shakespeare, everything passes at par, temporarily, truth alone remains permanently. In 16 Lessons teaching, for the first time in the history of the world, the true philosophy upon which all personal success is built. By the end, you have been listening to The Law of Success, Volume 2, Self-Confidence and the Habit of Saving, written by Napoleon Hill, narrated by Michael Stone. Thank you for listening. Find more free wealth classics on our YouTube channel, Audiobook Empire. Subscribe for a new classic every week.